Kill them all, every single one. I want 381 body bags by morning. The enemy commander said it without rage, without hesitation. Calm the way a man orders coffee. Then he smiled. Below him, 381 of America's finest warriors were bleeding out in a canyon with no exits, no ammunition, no air support, and no way home. Every ridge owned, every passage sealed, every attempt to move met with fire. The trap had been months in the making, and it was working perfectly. 381 families were about to lose everything. Until a woman the military had silenced, sidelined, and forgotten picked up a rifle she was forbidden to touch and changed everything. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. Because what happens next will stay with you for a long time. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Walker had been in bad situations before. He had been in situations where the odds were terrible, where the mission had gone sideways, where men under his command had looked at him with that specific expression, the one that soldiers develop after enough years of combat. The look that says, "We trust you to get us out of this, Commander, so please, for the love of God, figure something out." He had seen that look in desert heat. He had seen it in jungle darkness. He had seen it in urban environments where every doorway was a potential last doorway. But he had never seen it here, not in Montana, not during what was supposed to be a training operation, not during what was supposed to be one of the most controlled, carefully structured, professionally designed exercises in the entire annual SEAL training calendar. And yet here he was, 45 minutes into the worst night of his professional life, crouched behind a frozen rock formation in a canyon that was slowly becoming a graveyard, listening to the sound of his men dying. Walker, Sergeant First Class Danny Reeves, appeared beside him, materializing out of the darkness the way good soldiers learn to move after enough years doing this. Danny was 31 years old, built like a man who had been assembled in a factory specifically designed to produce soldiers, and right now his face had an expression on it that Ethan had never seen there before. Fear, not the controlled, managed fear that warriors learn to use as fuel, not the professional anxiety that keeps soldiers sharp and careful. Real fear, the kind that lives in the chest and won't move. "Give it to me straight," Ethan said. "Northwest Passage gone. They have 3 machine gun nests covering it. Anyone who moves into that space is dead within 6 seconds. Danny paused. "I know because I watched it happen to Martinez's team." "Martinez, he's alive. 3 of his men aren't." Ethan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 1 second to absorb that information, to let the weight of it settle into whatever place inside him processed these things. Then he opened his eyes again, because a commander does not get the luxury of more than 1 second. Southeast rocket teams, 2 of them, positioned on the ridge about 800 meters up. They have clear line of sight on the entire passage floor. Danny shook his head slowly. "There's nowhere to go, Commander. I've been through every route in my head 3 times. The canyon has 4 exits and they own all 4 of them. The radio? Still down. The storm is blocking everything. I've tried 6 different frequencies." Ethan looked up at the sky. The storm was savage, the kind of winter system that people who lived in this region talked about for decades afterward, the kind that showed up on weather records as an anomaly, the kind that seemed almost personal in its intensity. Snow was falling so heavily that the world beyond 20 feet was a white void. Wind was cutting through the canyon with a sound like something in pain. No helicopters were coming, not through this. He pressed his back against the rock and thought. The mission had been straightforward. Recover 4 missing intelligence officers who had been captured during a separate operation and were being held in a facility approximately 12 miles inside the canyon system. 2 hours maximum, home by morning. Except the intelligence officers had never been there. The facility had been a set, a carefully constructed illusion designed to bring American operators into a specific geographic location at a specific time. Someone had known exactly what kind of bait would pull SEALs into a canyon. Someone had studied their protocols, their response patterns, their instincts about rescue missions involving American citizens. Someone had known them, which meant this was not a random ambush. This was something else entirely. "How many casualties?" Ethan asked. "Confirmed dead 7, wounded 31. 12 of those are critical." Danny's voice was flat, professional. He was doing the same thing Ethan was doing, the same compression of emotion that training teaches you and combat reinforces. "We've got enough ammunition for maybe 20 minutes of sustained firefight. After that, we're down to personal sidearms and bad words." 20 minutes, give or take. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. 381 men. He was responsible for 381 men, and the way things were currently structured, the most optimistic outcome he could construct in his mind involved roughly half of them surviving the night, maybe less. The enemy positions were professional, not the work of amateurs, not the improvised strategy of a militia that had gotten lucky. These positions had been established over time, with patience, with a deep understanding of how this specific canyon functioned as a killing ground. Whoever had set this up had stood in this canyon and studied it the way a surgeon studies an anatomy diagram. They had found every choke point, every natural funnel, every place where men would be forced to move slowly and expose themselves. Get me the squad leaders, Ethan said. Every one of them. 3 minutes. Danny disappeared back into the darkness. Ethan turned and looked out at the canyon floor. In the distance, intermittent bursts of fire lit up the darkness, his men fighting back, doing what they were trained to do, expending ammunition they could not afford to lose on enemy positions they could not afford to ignore. He thought about his daughter. Her name was Sophie. She was 9 years old. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness and an absolute conviction that her father was invincible, a conviction that Ethan had always found both deeply moving and quietly terrifying, because he knew better. He was not invincible. And right now, crouched in a canyon in the middle of a Montana winter storm, he was about as close to the opposite of invincible as he had ever been. Come on, Walker. Think, 5 kilometers away, on a ridge that most people would not even recognize as a place where a human being could survive for more than an hour in these conditions, Captain Olivia Hayes was already thinking. She had been thinking for 11 minutes, precisely 11 minutes, because she had checked her watch when the situation below went from training exercise to something else, and she had not stopped watching since. Her scope was extraordinary. Military-grade precision optics that could resolve details at distances that civilians might not believe were possible. Through it, she could see the canyon floor with clarity that felt almost brutal in its specificity. She could see faces, expressions, the way men moved when they were afraid and trying not to show it, the way they helped each other, the way the wounded were being dragged behind cover by men who were wounded themselves. She could count them. She had counted them. 381 American soldiers. Olivia's radio had been active for the last several minutes. Command was in her earpiece, a constant stream of information and instruction, voices overlapping, the controlled chaos of a headquarters element that was watching a catastrophe unfold through remote sensors and trying to manage it from a position of absolute helplessness. Observer Hayes confirmed visual. All observer teams are ordered to maintain position and avoid engagement. Repeat, do not engage under any circumstances. The voice belonged to Colonel Marcus Stern. She recognized it without having to see him. She had worked under Stern for 2 years, and she knew his voice the way you know. The sound of something that has become a fixture of your environment, familiar, consistent, carrying authority so practiced that it had become automatic. Observer Hayes acknowledged. She pressed her radio transmit button. Hayes, confirm visual. Good, hold your position. Air support is 40 minutes out minimum, and that assumes the storm breaks. We're working on ground extraction options, but that requires time. Do you understand? We need time. She looked through her scope at the canyon floor. A young soldier she estimated 22, maybe 23 years old, was dragging a wounded teammate across open ground, while enemy fire tore apart the space around him. He was not using a tactically sound route. He was using the route that got to his teammate the fastest, which was also the route most likely to get him killed. He was dragging his teammate because his teammate was important to him, not because of tactics, not because of strategic value, because of something simpler and more fundamental than any military calculation. The wounded soldier was his friend. Olivia watched this and felt something happen in her chest that she had learned over 3 years of observation duty to identify and set aside. It was the feeling that had ended her career as an active sniper. It was the feeling that had cost her everything she had built in the military up to that point. It was the feeling that had led to her refusal on that mission in the mountains overseas, the refusal that her superiors had labeled as a failure of discipline and that she had privately, stubbornly, continued to understand as something else entirely. 40 minutes. They don't have 40 minutes. She knew this with the absolute certainty of someone who had spent years studying tactical situations through optics. She had watched hundreds of firefights from exactly this kind of position, and she knew how they developed, how they breathed, how the momentum of one side crushing another side felt in the progression of events. The SEALs were running out of ammunition. She could see it in the rhythm of their return fire, the gaps growing longer, the suppression becoming more conservative, men choosing their shots more carefully because they were aware that every round they fired was one fewer round they had for what came next. What came next was going to be bad. 40 minutes. Hayes, it was Stern again. I need a status update on enemy positions in your sector. Focus on the northwest approach. What are you seeing? She looked northwest. She saw the 3 machine gun nests that Danny Reeves had already described to Ethan Walker. She saw the men operating them professional, calm, working in coordinated teams, rotating position to avoid overheating their weapons. She saw the geometry of their firing arcs and understood immediately that Danny had been right. Anything that moved into that northwest passage was going to die there. Northwest sector shows 3 crew-served weapons positions, she reported. Personnel appear trained and disciplined. Firing arcs cover approximately 90% of the passage floor. There is a narrow window on the western wall, approximately 4 meters wide, that falls outside their primary arc coverage, but it's exposed to the secondary position on the ridge. Copy that. Good work, Hayes. Hold position and continue observation. Hold position. Continue observation. She looked back at the young soldier who had been dragging his teammate. He had made it behind cover. He was hunched over the wounded man, doing something with his hands. First aid, she realized, trying to close a wound with whatever he had available. His lips were moving. She could not hear what he was saying, but she had enough experience reading faces through scopes to know. He was talking to his teammate, telling him to stay with him, telling him it was going to be okay, telling him a lie maybe, or maybe just telling him the only thing that mattered in that moment. You are not alone. I am here. Stay with me. Olivia Hayes had been an observer for 3 years. She had watched things through her scope that had cost her sleep on more nights than she could count. She had filed reports and transmitted coordinates and provided intelligence that commanders had used to make decisions, good decisions, decisions that had sometimes saved lives. But she had not fired her rifle in 3 years. She had not been permitted to. And right now, the weight of that prohibition felt like a physical object sitting on her chest. Back in the canyon, Ethan Walker had assembled his squad leaders in the only space that offered any meaningful cover, a natural alcove formed by 2 massive rock formations that created a partial windbreak and a roof of sorts against the snow. 6 men gathered there, each of them carrying in their face the specific exhaustion of soldiers who have been in sustained contact and know it isn't over. I need ideas, Ethan said. He did not preface this with anything. He did not explain the situation, because all of them already understood the situation in detail. Any idea, whatever you've got. Staff Sergeant Mike Callahan spoke first. Callahan was 44, the oldest man in the room, a veteran of more operations than most people knew were possible in a single military career. We could break into small teams, distribute the load, make it harder for them to track all of us. Harder to track, Ethan repeated. Also harder to coordinate. Also harder to keep the wounded moving. I know, Callahan said. I'm not saying it's a good idea. You asked for ideas, said Lieutenant James Park. 2 rocket teams on the ridge. But rockets have a minimum arming distance. If we can get close enough to them fast enough, 800 meters of open ground between us and the base of that ridge, Danny cut in a direct line. They'd hit us before we covered 1/10 of it. I know that too. What about the intelligence officers? Asked Corporal Ravi Singh. He was the youngest squad leader present, 26 years old, and he asked the question with the slight tentativeness of a man who knows the question might be naive, but believes it is important enough to ask anyway. The mission was recovery. Are we sure they were never here? They were never here, Ethan said with certainty he did not entirely feel. This was a setup from the beginning. Then whoever set it up knew our mission, Singh said. Nobody responded to that because everyone in the alcove was thinking the same thing, and the implications of that thought were large enough that none of them wanted to be the one to put it into words. Someone on the inside had helped build this trap. Someone who knew where 381 SEALs were going to be on this specific night in this specific canyon during what should have been a classified training operation. Okay, Ethan said, pulling everyone's attention back to the immediate problem. Here is what we know. We have 4 exits and we don't own any of them. We have approximately 20 minutes of meaningful ammunition. We have 31 wounded, 12 critical. We have no air support, no communication with command, and no visibility of any cavalry coming over any hill. He looked at each man in turn. Here's what we also know. Every single one of you has survived things that should have been unsurvivable. Every single one of you has been trained at a level that most human beings on this planet cannot imagine. And every single man out there in this canyon is watching us right now, watching these squad leaders, watching to see if we are afraid. He paused. Are we afraid? The silence in that alcove lasted exactly 3 seconds. No, he said, not with bravado, not with the performed courage of someone trying to convince himself, with the quiet, matter-of-fact tone of a man who has decided that this is simply the truth and does not require embellishment. No, said Danny Reeves, said the others. Then we stay in the fight, Ethan said. We consolidate the wounded to the central position here, this alcove, because it gives us the best natural cover. We establish a defensive perimeter. We make them come to us, which means they give up the range advantage. And we keep trying that radio every 60 seconds until we get something through. And if nothing gets through? Singh asked. Ethan looked at him steadily. Then we hold, he said. We hold until we can't hold anymore, and then we figure out what comes next. That's it. That's the whole plan. We hold. It was not a great plan. Everyone in that alcove knew it was not a great plan. But it was a plan, and in the absence of a great option, a functional plan executed with absolute commitment is sometimes enough. Sometimes. In her earpiece, Olivia was still hearing Stern's voice, but the content of his transmissions had shifted. He was no longer giving her instructions with the same confidence as before. His words had developed a quality she recognized, the quality of a commander who is watching something unfold that he does not know how to stop, and is reaching through his available options one by one and finding each of them insufficient. We have a window in the storm system, approximately 6 minutes, but it's not enough for a helicopter to get in and out safely. Air assets are holding and waiting for a longer break. A pause. Hayes, what's the current status of the northwestern machine gun positions? Still active. No change. Another pause. Longer this time. Understood. That was all. Understood. Olivia knew what that word meant in context. It meant we see what is happening and we cannot stop it, and we are hoping for something to change that we do not currently have the ability to create. She looked through her scope. She measured distance. She measured wind speed using the small sensor built into her equipment, 16 kilometers per hour, steady from the northeast, a wind that had maintained its direction for the last hour with only minor variations. She measured the drop characteristics required for a shot at the distance she was considering. She measured everything that could be measured. Then she put down her scope and looked at the canyon with her naked eyes, just her own vision, unassisted, seeing only what a human being standing on this ridge could see without any enhancement. She could see the fires of the firefight below, small bright flashes in the darkness. The sounds came to her on the wind, irregular, distributed across the canyon floor, the sound of people fighting for their lives. She picked her scope back up, and she found the enemy commander. He was not hiding. That was the first thing she noticed. He was standing on a ridge position approximately 4.2 kilometers away, and he was watching. He had a radio in one hand and a pair of binoculars in the other, and he was watching the canyon below with the relaxed attention of someone watching something unfold exactly according to plan. Occasionally, he raised the radio to his lips and said something. Occasionally, he made a gesture, and one of the men near him responded by moving to a different position or adjusting something. He was not fighting, he was managing, directing a victory that he was already certain of. And then this was the part that settled it for Olivia, the part that removed whatever remained of her hesitation. He did something. He smiled, a slow, satisfied smile, visible through her scope with terrible clarity, the smile of a man who is watching 381 people approach the end of their lives and feels nothing about it except the satisfaction of a plan well executed. Olivia's radio clicked. Observer Hayes. She did not answer immediately. She was doing mathematics, complex mathematics, the kind that takes into account wind, elevation, temperature differentials between ground level and ridge level, the Coriolis effect at extreme long range, bullet drop over the full extent of the shot, and the movement of the target because the enemy commander was not stationary. He was moving slowly along his ridge position, and a stationary calculation was not going to produce a hit on a moving target at 4.2 kilometers. She did the mathematics. She got an answer. Observer Hayes. Respond. She put her hand on the radio. She thought about Stern. She thought about the court-martial that would follow any unauthorized engagement. She thought about her rank, her record, her future in the military, everything she had sacrificed and everything she had held on to and everything she had hoped might eventually be restored. She thought about all of that. And then she thought about something her father had said to her when she was 7 years old, standing in the backyard of a house in Oregon, watching him help a neighbor repair a fence that the neighbor could not fix alone. Olivia, he had said, in that quiet, certain way he had of delivering things that were meant to last, if you have the power to help someone and you choose not to, you lose something more important than whatever you were protecting. You lose the part of yourself that knows the difference between right and wrong. And once you lose that part, you can train yourself to stop missing it. And that's the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person. She had been 7. She hadn't fully understood what he meant. She understood now. Olivia put her hand back on her rifle. She made the adjustment. She settled into position. And she made a decision that she knew, with complete clarity and no delusion whatsoever, was going to cost her everything she had worked to rebuild over 3 years of exile from the life she had chosen. She made it anyway. Because 381 families were at home right now, asleep or watching late-night television, or worrying quietly in the way that families of soldiers learn to worry. And they had no idea that the person standing between them and a devastating phone call tomorrow morning was a woman on a frozen ridge who had just decided that being right mattered more than being safe. She breathed out slowly. She found stillness, and then she fired. The sound of that shot did something remarkable in the canyon below. It did not sound like the other gunfire. Everything else had the specific acoustic quality of weapons being fired at a specific angle, from specific positions, within the enclosed space of the canyon. This shot came from somewhere else, from above, from a distance that created a different arrival pattern for the sound, a sound that reached the canyon floor a fraction of a second after the effect it created. The enemy commander dropped. One moment he was standing on his ridge, managing his victory, wearing that slow, satisfied smile. The next moment he was simply gone. For a few seconds, the canyon went quiet in a way it had not been quiet since the whole thing started. Not truly quiet, the wind was still howling. And there were still injured men making sounds that injured men make, but operationally quiet. The enemy fire stuttered. The coordinated, professional rhythm of the ambush lost something critical in that moment, something that could not immediately be identified or replaced, the way an orchestra loses its coherence and the conductor disappears. Ethan Walker heard it. He felt it before he understood it. He pressed himself against the rock and looked at Danny Reeves, and Danny was looking back at him with an expression that mixed confusion with something tentative, the beginning of something that looked almost like hope, which was dangerous, because hope in a tactical situation can get you killed if it makes you careless. What was that? I don't know, Ethan said. Then the second shot came, and the first of the machine gun nests in the Northwest Passage went silent. Up on her ridge, Olivia was already moving. Not retreating, repositioning. Every shot she took gave enemy forces a slightly better idea of where she was. Muzzle flash, sound signature, angle of impact. These were things that soldiers could interpret, and the enemy had trained soldiers. They would be looking for her within minutes, which meant she could not stay in one place, which meant every shot required an immediate repositioning. She moved fast across the ridge, her body carrying the weight of her equipment with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom this specific kind of movement had been practiced for years. She found her next position. She had identified 4 potential positions before she fired her first shot, because she had been watching this ridge for hours and had spent part of that time planning exactly this contingency. She settled in, she found her scope, she found her next target. Her radio was going absolutely wild in her earpiece. Stern's voice had changed character completely. The controlled authority was still there, but underneath it was something she had never heard in his voice before. Hayes. Hayes, respond immediately. We are detecting fire from your position. Hayes, she clicked her transmit button once, which in their communication protocol meant alive, operational, busy. Then she found the second machine gun nest. She did the calculation in the time it takes a person to exhale. She fired. Down in the canyon, another position went dark. Someone's working for us, Danny Reeves said. He had been watching the pattern develop for 3 minutes now, the specific sequence of impacts. The way each shot eliminated a position that was blocking a route, the geometry of what was happening. Someone is out there clearing a path. Northwest Passage, Ethan said immediately. He had been watching the same pattern with the same analytical focus, and he had reached the same conclusion. 2 of the 3 positions there are gone. If the third one went silent. Ethan and Danny looked at each other. The passage is open, Danny said. For how long? Ethan said. Neither of them had an answer to that. Then Ethan's radio, the same radio that had been dead for the last 45 minutes, crackled. Faintly, barely perceptibly, but unmistakably, the sound of a transmission breaking through the interference. A woman's voice. Calm, completely, almost unnervingly calm given the circumstances. Ethan grabbed his radio. This is Walker. Who is this? A pause. 2 seconds. When I tell you to move, Commander, you run. You take every man who can move and you run northwest. Do not stop. Do not slow down for anything that isn't a man who physically cannot move on his own. Do you understand me? Ethan's jaw tightened. He was not a man who took orders from voices he did not recognize without asking questions. Who are you? He said. Identify yourself. Another pause. Slightly longer. And then the voice said something that Ethan Walker would remember for the rest of his life, would repeat to his daughter years later. When she asked him to tell her about the night in the canyon, would have engraved eventually quietly, privately, not for display in a place where he could see it on ordinary days. Someone who decided your men deserve to go home. Ethan lowered the radio. He looked at Danny. Danny was already looking at him. Do we trust it? Danny asked. Ethan thought about the 3 machine gun positions that had been eliminated with impossible precision in the last 4 minutes. He thought about the voice, the quality of it, the absence of hesitation in it, the way it delivered certainty without drama. He thought about 381 men who were going to die if he did nothing. Get everyone ready, he said. Tell the squad leaders on my signal, Northwest Passage, full speed, no stopping. And the critical wounded? You think I forgot about the critical wounded? Ethan said, and his tone held the first edge of heat that had been in his voice all night. We carry every one of them. Every single one, nobody stays. Danny nodded and disappeared. Ethan pressed his back against the rock and looked up at the storm-dark sky and said something very quiet, not quite a prayer, not quite a statement, somewhere between the two. Whoever you are, he said, please don't run out of ammunition. On the ridge, Olivia had just moved to her 3rd position and was already scanning for her next target when she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Not fear, not doubt, clarity. The particular crystalline clarity that comes when a person stops calculating the cost of an action and simply commits to it completely. When the question of should I becomes irrelevant, because the answer to will I is already decided, is already embedded in everything you are doing with your hands and your body and your eyes. She was not thinking about Colonel Stern. She was not thinking about the court-martial. She was not thinking about the 3 years of exile, the humiliation of observer duty, the slow erosion of her sense of herself as a soldier who mattered. She was thinking about the Northwest Passage. She was thinking about whether she had created enough of a window in the enemy coverage to move 381 men through it before the remaining enemy forces could reorganize. She was thinking about angles and timing and the specific sequence of targets she needed to eliminate in the next 90 seconds to give those men a realistic chance of surviving the passage. She was thinking like the sniper she had always been, the sniper that 3 years of punishment had not been able to take out of her. She found her next target. She breathed. She fired. And below her in the canyon, a signal went up. Ethan Walker had made his decision. 381 men began to move. What happened in the Northwest Passage over the next 11 minutes was something that the soldiers who survived it would spend decades attempting to describe to people who had not been there, with limited success, because there are certain kinds of experiences that resist translation into ordinary language. Men ran. They ran carrying each other, the mobile carrying the wounded, the less wounded carrying the more wounded, chains of physical effort and human will moving through a passage that had been covered by enemy fire 90 seconds ago and was now impossibly clear. Enemy fire came at them. Of course it came. The remaining forces were responding, reorganizing, redirecting their attention to the passage. But every time a weapon opened up that threatened to stop the movement, something happened to it. Positions fell silent. Commanders went down. Communication nodes collapsed. Someone up in the darkness above the canyon was working through the problem with methodical precision, treating each threat not as a crisis but as a calculation, an equation to be solved, a problem with a correct answer that could be derived if you had the skill and the patience and the absolute refusal to stop. Danny Reeves ran with 2 wounded men hanging off his shoulders, 1 arm each, his legs moving with mechanical determination through snow and rock and darkness. At one point, an enemy fighter stepped out from behind cover directly in front of him, no more than 40 meters away, and raised a weapon. The fighter went down before he fired. Danny did not break stride. He ran. They all ran. And Olivia Hayes, moving constantly across her ridge, repositioning after every shot, burning through ammunition that she had a finite and dwindling supply of, doing mathematics in real time that no training exercise had ever fully prepared her for, stayed on that mountain and worked. She had been told to observe. She was doing something else. She was doing the only thing she had ever truly been made to do. She was protecting the people below her from the darkness that wanted to consume them. And as the last of the SEAL element cleared the Northwest Passage and the sounds of gunfire began to shift, began to reflect pursuit rather than ambush, which meant the trap had been broken, which meant the worst was over, Olivia found a moment of stillness on her ridge. She looked down at the canyon. She could not see them clearly anymore. They were past the passage, moving into terrain that gave them options, which was all she had ever been trying to give them. Options. Not victory, not safety, not a clean ending, just the possibility of one, which was all any of them had ever had. She lowered her rifle for the first time since the operation began. Her hands were trembling slightly. She noticed this with a kind of detached interest, the way a person notices something about their own body that their mind was too occupied to register in real time. Her radio was still going. Stern's voice, continuous, urgent, carrying all the authority of someone who has just watched a subordinate do exactly what they were explicitly ordered not to do, and is processing the full range of implications simultaneously. She let it talk. She looked at the night around her. And she understood something that she had understood before, 3 years ago, on a different mountain, in a different country, when she had looked through her scope and seen something her orders had not accounted for, and made a choice that had cost her everything. Some things matter more than career. Some things matter more than rank. Some things matter more than the approval of people who have the authority to evaluate your performance, but not the ability to see what you see in the moment when it matters. And sometimes, not always, not often, but sometimes the most important thing a person can do is exactly the thing they have been told they must not do. She picked up her radio. She pressed transmit. "Colonel Stern," she said. "This is Hayes. The SEAL element has cleared the Northwest Passage. I am submitting myself for disciplinary review at your convenience." A pause. "Sir," there was a long silence on the other end. Then Stern's voice came back. Still authoritative, still controlled, but with something underneath it that had not been there before. Something she could not quite name. "Hayes," he said, "confirm that the SEAL element is clear." "Confirmed, sir." Another silence. "Are you injured?" She considered her answer. "Not significantly, sir." And then Stern said something that she did not expect. He said nothing. For a full 10 seconds, there was silence on the channel. And then the rescue helicopters, held back by a storm that was finally at the edge of possibility, beginning to break, began moving toward the canyon. And Olivia Hayes stayed on her mountain. Not because she was ordered to, because she wasn't finished yet, because the night wasn't over, and because 381 men were still out there, still running, and she was still the person standing between them and whatever came next. She raised her rifle. She went back to work. The Northwest Passage was open. But open did not mean safe. Ethan Walker knew that better than anyone. He had been in enough situations where a window of opportunity lasted exactly long enough to make you believe in it before it slammed shut on your fingers. He had watched men die in windows. He had watched men survive in windows. And the difference between those two outcomes had almost never come down to the quality of the window. It had come down to what the men did while it was open. "Move," he said, not loud, not a shout. The kind of word that carries because of what is behind it, not because of volume. Everyone moves now. The canyon erupted into a different kind of chaos. For 45 minutes, the movement in that canyon had been defensive men pressing into cover, minimizing exposure, choosing stillness over action because action meant dying. Now the energy reversed entirely. 381 men who had been trained for exactly this, for the moment when stillness becomes a death sentence and movement becomes the only viable option, stopped being stationary and became something else. They became a force. Danny Reeves was the first one into the passage. That was not by accident. Ethan had positioned him there specifically because Danny was the kind of man you put at the front of something dangerous. Not because you don't value him, but because you know he will not flinch, and the men behind him will follow a person who does not flinch when they would not follow anything else. Danny ran into the passage and immediately took fire from somewhere to his left. He kept running, not bravery, not recklessness. He kept running because he had done the calculation in the half second between the incoming fire and his next stride, and the calculation had told him that stopping was more dangerous than continuing. The shots were high. Whoever was shooting was elevated and adjusting for the wrong angle. Keep moving and the angle gets worse for them. Stop and you give them time to correct. Keep moving. He kept moving. Behind him, the first of the wounded came through, carried between two soldiers who were themselves not entirely uninjured, three men moving as a single unit through terrain that would have been difficult under any circumstances, and was brutally difficult under these ones. Ethan watched from the entry point of the passage, counting heads, tracking the flow, doing the thing that commanders do, which looks from the outside like standing still, but is actually the most intense form of work, absorbing every piece of incoming information, processing it, making decisions in fractions of seconds, staying ahead of a situation that is moving faster than any plan can account for. Critical wounded, he said to Staff Sergeant Callahan, who was managing the evacuation flow beside him. Where are we on the critical wounded? 12 of them, Callahan said. We've got 10 moving. Rodriguez and Chen are still in the central position. We need more carriers. Get me names, get me bodies. Already on it, Rodriguez. Ethan knew the name. Rodriguez was 24 years old. He had joined the SEALs 3 years ago and had a mother in San Antonio who called him every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock without fail, a detail Rodriguez had mentioned exactly once. In passing, during a rest break on an earlier training exercise, in which Ethan had retained the way commanders retain things about the men they are responsible for, not deliberately, but because some information simply matters too much to forget. Rodriguez was not leaving this canyon without being carried. Ethan turned back to the passage. And that was when the sky above the canyon did something unexpected. It lit up. The enemy had flares. Of course they had flares. Ethan had not thought about flares because his mind had been occupied with machine guns and rocket teams and ammunition counts and wounded personnel, and flares had seemed like the kind of detail that belonged to a different category of problem. But the enemy commander who had gone down the one, eliminated by whatever impossible shot had come out of the darkness above the canyon, had apparently not been the only person with authority to order illumination. Someone else had taken over. Someone who had assessed the situation, recognized that the Northwest Passage was compromised, and made a fast, competent decision to light up the kill zone and give the remaining weapons team something to aim at. The flares turned night into a harsh, shadowless approximation of day. Every man moving through the passage was suddenly visible. Down, someone shouted multiple people, the word coming from several directions at once, the instinctive warning of soldiers who understand what illumination means. Some men went down. Others kept running, because stopping in the passage was worse than being visible in it, because they were already committed and retreat was death, and the only direction that led anywhere other than death was forward. The fire that came in the next 30 seconds was the heaviest and most accurate of the entire night. Corporal James Whitfield, 27 years old, 3 months from the end of his current deployment, a man who had spent the last 40 minutes helping a wounded teammate stay conscious by talking to him about baseball, because his teammate had asked him to talk about something normal, something that had nothing to do with the canyon. Whitfield went down in the passage. He did not die, but he went down hard, and he was not getting up on his own. The soldier he had been carrying the wounded he had been keeping conscious with baseball statistics turned around in the middle of the passage, under fire, with flares burning overhead, making both of them perfectly visible, and went back for Whitfield. His name was Private First Class Aaron Torres, 21 years old, the youngest man in the unit, a kid from El Paso who had joined the military the week after his 19th birthday and had spent the intervening 2 years becoming something that his 19-year-old self could not have imagined. Torres went back. He grabbed Whitfield by the collar and started pulling him forward. "I got you," Torres said, loud enough for Whitfield to hear over the noise. "I got you, Whit. Keep your head down. I got you." Torres, Whitfield started. "Don't talk. Save it. Just keep your head down and let me move you." Above them, the flares burned. Above the flares, somewhere in the darkness of the ridge, Olivia Hayes had already identified the new problem. The flares changed everything. Olivia had been working in darkness, which was a disadvantage for her in some ways. She needed her scope's low-light capability at full extension, and the wind was making thermal management difficult, but it was also a disadvantage for the enemy, because darkness equalizes. Darkness makes everyone partly blind. The flares ended the equality. Her scope showed her the passage with sudden, terrible clarity. She could see the men moving through it. She could see Whitfield going down. She could see Torres going back. She could see the enemy weapons positions that had survived her earlier shots, redirecting their attention toward the illuminated passage, adjusting their angles, correcting for the moving targets with the professional focus of soldiers who know they have a limited window before the flares burnout. She also saw something else. There was a position she had not previously identified. Tucked into a rock formation on the eastern face of the canyon, covering an angle that her earlier repositioning had put outside her efficient firing arc. She had known it was there. She had cataloged it during her initial observation. But she had been working through higher priority positions first, and this one had been classified as secondary, because its angle was not optimal for the main passage. The flares had changed its angle. With the passage illuminated, the eastern position suddenly had a clear line of sight on men it had previously been unable to engage. She had approximately 45 seconds before that crew got their weapon fully oriented on the passage. She was in the wrong position to engage it efficiently. She moved, running across a ridgeline in winter conditions at night while managing a precision rifle and attempting to close a specific angular gap on a target that had a time limit is not something that can be done gracefully. It can only be done with complete commitment to speed at the expense of everything else. Olivia ran in a way that she had not run since her last physical assessment full extension. All reserves, the kind of that uses up the energy you were saving for something else and demands payment later. She found her position. She did not take time to settle properly. Proper settling takes 60 to 90 seconds slow breathing, muscle relaxation, the deliberate process of making your body into the most stable possible platform for precision work. She had 15 seconds. She did what she could with 15 seconds. She found the eastern position in her scope. The crew was almost oriented. She fired. The shot was not her cleanest. She knew it the moment it left the barrel. The breathing wasn't right. The body position wasn't ideal. There was a tension in her right shoulder that she had not fully managed to release. At normal engagement distances, that kind of imperfection produced a miss. At the distances she was working, that kind of imperfection produced a miss. But she was not working at normal distances, and she had spent 20 years accounting for imperfection. The eastern position went silent. Olivia exhaled. In the passage below, the fire directed at Torres and Whitfield slackened by a critical margin, not enough to be safe, not nearly enough to be comfortable, but enough for Torres to get Whitfield moving again, to get both of them deeper into the passage, closer to the far end where the terrain opened up and cover became possible. "Move," Torres said, pulling. "Come on, Whit, move." "My leg. I know about your leg." "Move anyway." Whitfield moved anyway. Ethan had been counting, not officially, not with a clicker or a tally sheet, but in the way that commanders count a running awareness of how many have passed, how many remain, how many are moving versus how many need to be moved. It was a kind of cognitive background process, always running, never quite in the foreground, but never entirely out of it either. At the 8-minute mark from when movement began, he calculated that approximately 240 men had cleared the initial passage entry. That left roughly 140 still waiting, plus the critical wounded who had not yet been carried through. Rodriguez and Chen were still in the central position. "Callahan," he said. Callahan appeared at his elbow. The man moved like a ghost when he needed to, which was one of the reasons Ethan had kept him close all night. "Rodriguez and Chen are still in the central. 2 men critical. I need carriers. I've got Harper and Kim who can take Chen," Callahan said. "Rodriguez is the problem. He took a second hit while we were staging for movement. He can't be moved the normal way. We need a litter." A litter. A stretcher. Something they absolutely did not have in standard configuration on a training-turned-real operation in the middle of a Montana canyon. "What do we have?" Ethan said. Callahan looked at him, then looked around. "Jackets," he said. 2 jackets, a rifle as a spine board. "It's not going to be comfortable. It doesn't need to be comfortable. It needs to hold him long enough to get him through the passage. Then yes, we can make that work." "Make it work," Ethan said. "You've got 4 minutes." Callahan disappeared. Ethan turned back to the passage. The flow of men was continuous now, a river of movement that had found its momentum. He could feel it, that specific quality that develops when a unit stops reacting and starts executing, when the energy shifts from survival to something more purposeful. These were SEALs. They had been trained in exactly this state, under exactly these conditions. The ambush had stunned them. The trap had nearly broken them. But nearly was the operative word, and now the machine was running. His radio crackled again. Her voice, same frequency, same tone. Calm in a way that was not indifferent, but rather the opposite, the calm of someone who is spending everything they have on the problem in front of them and has nothing left over for panic. "Commander Walker." "Hayes," he said, because he had decided to use the name even without confirmation, because something about the situation demanded names. "Talk to me." "You have a secondary force assembling east of the passage exit. I count approximately 30 personnel, moving to intercept at the passage terminus. A pause of exactly 1 second. They knew you'd run northwest. This was layered. Ethan processed that in the time it takes to breathe. Layered. Of course it was layered. A trap built by someone who understood sealed decision-making would not have a single layer. The Northwest Passage had been left deliberately understaffed, or rather staffed at a level that looked insurmountable, but could be reduced by someone with the right capability from the right position. Because whoever built this trap had accounted for the possibility that the SEALs might have an asset they didn't know about. They had expected Olivia to clear the passage, and they had prepared something for when she did. How far from the terminus? Ethan asked. At their current pace, 6 minutes, maybe 7. Can you reach them from your position? A pause. Longer this time. Not efficiently. Angle is difficult. I'd need to reposition significantly. How significantly? Enough that I'd be exposed for a period I'd prefer not to be exposed for. She was not saying she wouldn't do it. She was giving him information, letting him make the calculation with accurate inputs. How many of my men are at the terminus right now? He asked. Leading elements approximately 50. More coming through continuously. 50 SEALs against 30 personnel in an ambush position was not a terrible equation. Not if the SEALs had warning. Not if they knew what was waiting for them. Get me a direction and a distance to that secondary force, Ethan said. I'll handle the terminus. Another pause. Then Hayes said northeast of the exit point, approximately 400 meters. They're using a dry creek bed for concealment. Moving south-southwest. Copy. Ethan switched frequencies and raised Danny Reeves, who had cleared the passage 7 minutes ago and was managing the collection point on the far side. Danny, listen to me carefully. Danny Reeves had not sat down since clearing the passage. He had been doing what he did, moving, assessing, organizing the kinetic version of the command thinking that Ethan did from stillness. Around him, men were coming through the passage exit in a continuous stream, some running, some limping, some being carried. The collection point was a controlled chaos of arriving bodies and establishing security positions and medical triage that the corpsmen were handling with the focused efficiency of people who have trained for mass casualty events and are now, in the worst possible way, grateful for that training. His radio came alive with Ethan's voice. Dry creek bed northeast of your position, 400 meters. 30-person force moving to intercept you. You've got 6 minutes. Danny did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, source? More than reliable. Act on it. That was enough for Danny Reeves. He had been in enough situations with Ethan Walker to understand that more than reliable was not a phrase his commanding officer used casually. Understood, Danny said. I'll handle it. He turned and found Callahan's secondary team leader, a woman named Sergeant First Class Patricia Okafor, 36 years old, the most consistently accurate shooter in the unit, and told her what he knew. Okafor listened without interruption. Then she said, how many rounds do we have collectively? Check your team and report back in 60 seconds. She checked, she reported. The number was not generous. But it was not nothing northeast, Danny said. Move. Quiet. Let them think they've still got surprise. Okafor took her team and moved northeast. 4 minutes later, before the secondary force reached its intended ambush position, before it could finish establishing itself in the creek bed it had chosen for concealment, before it could execute the second layer of a trap that had been built to be inescapable, Okafor's team hit it from an angle it had not anticipated. The secondary force lost cohesion in the first 30 seconds. By the 3-minute mark, it had ceased to function as a coordinated threat. The passage terminus remained open. Men kept coming through. Back on the ridge, Olivia was running again. She had not stopped moving for 11 minutes, and the weight of her equipment, which she had managed efficiently for hours, was starting to become something more than equipment. Her shoulders carried it differently now. Her legs moved with a quality that she recognized from the outer edge of long training evolutions, the territory past tired, where the body starts having a conversation with the mind about how much further this can go. She had always won that conversation before. She intended to win it again, but she was burning through her ammunition. She had entered this operation with a load that was designed for observer duty because that was what she was supposed to be doing, because nobody had planned for this, because you do not load an observer with full engagement quantities. She had approximately 32 rounds remaining. Against an enemy force that had originally numbered in the hundreds and had been reduced, she estimated what she had engaged and what she had seen go down to somewhere between 60 and 90 still operational. 32 rounds was not enough to fight 60 to 90 people. But 32 rounds was enough to solve the specific problems that 32 rounds could solve. She stopped at her next position, settled, and did an assessment. What remained of the enemy force was reorganizing. She could see it through her scope. The quality of movement had changed, become more cautious, more fragmented. They had lost their command structure, lost multiple weapons positions, lost their expected second layer at the terminus, and lost the clean victory that they had planned and anticipated. What was left was still dangerous. A wounded animal is often more dangerous than a healthy one, but it was different. It was reactive instead of proactive. It was responding instead of driving. She had changed the battlefield. Now she needed to hold what had been changed. Her radio clicked. Not stern this time. A different voice, one of the coordination elements that had apparently been activated when the situation surpassed the capacity of observation to manage it. Observer Hayes, we have a helicopter inbound. Estimated arrival at your position 14 minutes. Can you confirm extraction capability? She considered this. Negative, she said. Not at my current position. There's an enemy fire team within range of the only suitable landing zone on this ridge. I need to clear it before I can accept extraction. A pause. Understood. Can you? Yes, she said before they finished the question. Give me 12 minutes. She moved again. Ethan Walker was the last man into the passage. He had waited until he was certain as the situation permitted, which was not completely certain, but was the best available approximation that every man who could be moved had been moved. Rodriguez had gone through on his improvised litter, carried by 4 soldiers who had crossed the passage at a pace that was somewhere between a walk and a run, a pace chosen by the compromise between speed and the need not to drop a critically injured man on rocky terrain. Chen had gone through 10 minutes before Rodriguez. Ethan had watched them both go. Now he stood at the entry point of the passage and looked back at the canyon. The firefight behind them had become something different. The enemy was still active. He could hear it, see the muzzle flashes, but the character of it had changed. It was searching instead of converging, looking for targets that had moved rather than pressing toward targets that were fixed. They had bought time. Someone had bought them time. He stepped into the passage. He ran. The passage walls were close enough on either side that he could have touched them simultaneously with arms extended. The ground was uneven in a way that punished inattention, rocks that seemed placed specifically to catch a running foot, patches of ice that offered no warning before delivering a consequence. He ran through it the way he had learned to run through bad terrain 20 years ago, trusting his body to handle the ground while his mind stayed above it, processing, tracking, staying ahead. Incoming fire found the passage twice more while he was in it. Neither hit him. Whether that was skill or fortune or the continued work of whoever was on that ridge, he did not know. He suspected all 3, in proportions he would never be able to accurately calculate. He came out the far end of the passage and nearly ran into Danny Reeves. Danny caught him by the shoulder. Commander, Danny said. Status, Ethan said. Passage is clear behind you. Secondary force at the terminus has been neutralized. Danny paused for a fraction of a second. The pause of a man doing a count while he speaks. 361 men accounted for on this side. 14 critical, 42 walking wounded. 7 confirmed KIA left in the canyon. Another pause. We have 20 men unaccounted for. 20. Ethan's chest did something complicated. Unaccounted for meaning I don't know. Missing in the passage, missing in the canyon, missing at collection. I have teams going back through the count right now. Find them, Ethan said. Every one of them. Working on it. Ethan turned away and looked at the passage exit, at the stream of men who had just come through one of the worst experiences of their professional lives and were now sitting on the ground or helping each other or standing very still with the particular stillness of people who are alive and are aware of that fact in a way they were not aware of it an hour ago. He looked at their faces. He thought about what it had cost to move them from one side of that passage to the other, not in terms of ammunition or tactical positioning or command decisions, in terms of what it cost the person on the ridge. He raised his radio. Hayes. The response came quickly. Too quickly for someone who had been given 12 minutes to clear a landing zone, which meant she was still moving, still working, handling her next problem, and the radio simultaneously. Walker, I need a status on your situation, he said. A sound that might have been a short exhale or wind. Hard to distinguish. I'm operational, she said. That's not what I asked. A silence of 3 seconds. I have approximately 28 rounds remaining, she said. I have enemy personnel within 800 meters of my position. I have a landing zone that needs to be fractional pause. 9 minutes. And I have what feels like the beginning of frostbite in 2 fingers on my left hand, which is irrelevant to the current situation, but you asked for status. Ethan looked at Danny. Danny was listening. His jaw was tight. Is the LZ clearable? I'll clear it, Hayes said. The certainty in her voice was not performed. It had the quality of a statement about physics, not preference, not hope, but the confident declaration of someone who has assessed a problem and arrived at a solution, and is now simply executing the solution. Hayes, Commander Walker. Her voice changed slightly. Stayed calm, but gained something. I did not clear that passage and engage that secondary force and run across this ridge for 11 minutes in these conditions so that the helicopter doesn't land. The LZ will be clear, I give you my word. Ethan Walker had spent 20 years in the military learning to read people through the quality of their voice, through what they said and how they said it and the gap between the two. He believed, he said. We'll have eyes on your LZ from the terminus. If anything comes at you from the canyon side, Don't send anyone back into the canyon, she said immediately. Your men are out. That's the point of all this. They stay out. A pause. That's an order, Commander. She was not in his chain of command. She had no authority to give him orders. He was going to follow this one anyway. Understood, he said. He lowered the radio. Danny said quietly, Who is she? Ethan looked at the passage exit, looked at the 361 men sitting on the far side of the thing that had been designed to kill all of them. I don't know yet, he said. But I'm going to find out. On the ridge, Olivia was moving toward the landing zone. 7 minutes remaining. 28 rounds. A fire team of enemy personnel between her and the LZ, and she could not see them yet, but she knew they were there because she had seen them moving 12 minutes ago and had tracked their probable path, and the math of their movement brought them to a position that intersected with the LZ approach within her remaining time window. She found them 4 minutes later. Not because they were careless, they were not careless. These were trained men, and they were moving with deliberate attention to cover and concealment. She found them because she knew where to look, because she had been watching this ridge for hours before any of this started, cataloging terrain features, noting which rock formations offered approach routes and which ones offered dead ends, building a mental map of the ridge that was now more reliable than any physical map would have been. She found them. She settled. She had 7 rounds to spare on this problem. 7 rounds because she needed 21 to clear the LZ itself, and she had done that arithmetic before she moved. She used 4. The fire team went to ground. Not all casualties, she had not been precise enough for that with the angles and the movement, and she knew it. But down disrupted, using cover, and crucially no longer moving toward the LZ. She moved past them fast. She reached the LZ entry with 3 minutes on her internal clock. Cleared the first position 2 rounds, cleared the second 3 rounds. The third position saw her. Fire came at her and she went down, not hit, a deliberate drop to cover, but it cost her time. It cost her the kind of time that is measured in seconds, but feels longer because of what depends on each second. She came up. She found her target. She fired. The third position cleared. She raised her radio. This is Observer Hayes. Landing zone is clear. I say again, LZ is clear. You are authorized to approach. The response from the helicopter pilot was immediate. Copy that, Observer. Inbound. 90 seconds. She lay on the frozen ground and looked at the sky. The storm was breaking. Not dramatically, not the way storms break in movies, with sudden parting clouds and moonlight. The way real storms break, which is gradually, reluctantly, in sections, the darkness thinning in patches rather than all at once. Stars appeared. Not many. Not enough to navigate by, not enough to be beautiful in any conventional sense. But there, real and present. She lay on the ridge and looked at them, and did not think about Colonel Stern, did not think about the court-martial, did not think about career or rank or the consequences of the last 2 hours. She thought about nothing for a moment that lasted exactly as long as she allowed it to last. Then the sound of rotors reached her. She sat up. She was not finished. She would not be finished until the helicopter was down and the men who needed it were on it, and it was in the air. She raised her rifle. She watched the approach. She watched the darkness around the LZ. She watched the way a person watches something they have decided to protect, which is with a specific quality of attention that is not alertness exactly, not aggression exactly, but something that contains both of those things and adds to them something harder to name. Commitment, maybe, or love. The particular difficult love that soldiers sometimes develop for the people they are responsible for, a love that does not look like love from the outside because it is expressed entirely in action and never in sentiment, a love that consists entirely of staying, watching, not leaving until the thing you were there to protect has been protected to the furthest possible extent. The helicopter touched down, and Captain Olivia Hayes, alone on a frozen ridge, with an empty rifle and frostbitten fingers, and 11 minutes of running in her legs, and 2 hours of impossible work in her hands, kept watching until it was done. The helicopter touched down hard on the ridge, and the moment its skids made contact with frozen ground, everything changed. Not the danger. The danger was still there. The remnants of the enemy force were still active somewhere below, still capable of organized response, still angry in the way that a force that has just had its carefully constructed victory dismantled tends to be angry. The danger had not gone anywhere, but something else had changed. The men loading into that helicopter, 4 critically wounded SEALs who had been waiting in the collection point for exactly this moment, were going to survive the night. Olivia knew it with the same certainty she applied to ballistic calculations. She had watched the medics work on them during the 22 minutes since the passage had been cleared. She had watched the controlled, efficient motion of corpsmen who understood that their only thing standing between those men and a different outcome. And she had watched through the darkness and the thinning storm, the colors slowly return to faces that had gone the wrong kind of pale. They were going to make it. Rodriguez was going to make it. She watched the helicopter lift, watched it angle away from the ridge, moving fast, running southeast toward the trauma center that had been put on standby 3 hours ago when the first distress signals came through. The sound of its rotors diminished, became a texture in the air rather than a sound, then disappeared entirely. She was alone on the ridge, completely, absolutely alone, in a way that she had not been for the last 2 hours, despite the fact that no one else had been physically near her for any of that time. There is a difference between solitude during a mission and solitude after one. During the mission, the work fills all the available space. After the space opens back up, and what rushes in to fill it is not peace. It is everything you did not have time to feel while you were working. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this without judgment. Adrenaline withdrawal, standard physiological response. Her body had been running on emergency fuel for 2 hours, and now the emergency was over, and the fuel was burning off. And what remained was the physical system beneath the adrenaline, which was exhausted and cold and in need of things that the ridge was not equipped to provide. The radio in her earpiece had been quiet for 4 minutes, the longest stretch of quiet since the whole thing started. Then it ended. Hayes, Colonel Marcus Stern's voice. Not the operational Stern, not the commander managing a crisis in real time, making decisions under pressure, processing incoming information faster than seemed humanly possible. This was a different version. The version that existed after the crisis, when the immediate problem was resolved and the other problems, the ones that the crisis had created or exposed, came forward to take their place. She pressed transmit. Hayes, go ahead, sir. Are you injured? Frostbite, 2 fingers, left hand. Minor lacerations from repositioning across the ridge. Nothing requiring immediate intervention. A pause. You need to come in. Yes, sir. There's a vehicle at the canyon's southern approach. 30 minutes from your current position on foot. Can you make that? She looked at her legs. Assess them the way a mechanic assesses an engine that has been running hard, not asking whether it feels good, but whether it will function for the required distance. Yes, she said. Good. Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that contains something that has not yet found its way into words. Hayes, sir, we'll talk when you're in. Not a question. Not a threat. Just a statement of fact, delivered in a tone that she could not fully decode, which was itself unusual because she had spent 2 years learning to read Stern's voice, the way a musician learns to read a particular instrument, its range, its overtones, the specific qualities that indicated specific things. Right now, it was not indicating anything clearly. And that uncertainty sat in her chest with a weight that was different from the weight of the mission. The mission weight she knew how to carry. This other weight was less familiar. Understood, sir, she said. She gathered her equipment, checked her rifle empty, completely empty, which was a fact that she examined for a moment before filing it away. She had fired every round she had, not wastefully, not recklessly. She had fired every round at a problem that required solving and had solved the problems, and the math had come out to 0 remaining. She started walking. 30 minutes across a frozen ridge in the dark, alone, with equipment that felt heavier than it had when she put it on 12 hours ago. And as she walked, the thing that had been held back by the necessity of the mission began arriving in fragments. Not as emotion exactly, not tears, not the dramatic release that people imagine when they picture soldiers processing difficult events. It arrived as memory. as images, as a specific photographic quality that certain moments acquire when your brain recognizes them as significant and stores them differently from ordinary experience. The young soldier dragging his teammate across the canyon floor. Torres going back for Whitfield. Rodriguez on his improvised litter carried by 4 men who were wounded themselves and carried him anyway. 381 families who did not know tonight had happened. She walked, and she thought about the one thing she had not let herself think about during the entire operation. The thing that Stern's careful, unreadable tone had brought to the surface. What came next? 14 minutes into her walk, her radio came alive again. Not Stern. A voice she did not recognize, male, young, with the specific quality of someone who has been authorized to make a call they are not entirely sure they should be making. Observer Hayes, she frowned slightly. Who is this? This is short pause. This is Corporal Singh. Ravi Singh. I'm at the collection point with Commander Walker. He asked me to relay something to you. She stopped walking. Not because she needed to stop to talk. Because something in the quality of that message, the slight awkwardness of it, the fact that Walker was relaying through a corporal rather than using his own radio, the specific choice of that channel told her that this was not an operational communication. Go ahead, Corporal. He wants you to know. Singh paused again, and she could hear in the pause a young man trying to accurately transmit something that mattered. He says 361 men are accounted for and standing, plus 20 found during passage recount. He says all 381 are breathing. He says he wants you to know that before you hear anything else tonight. Olivia stood on the ridge. The wind moved around her. 381, all of them. She had known the passage had been cleared. She had tracked the numbers as best she could from her position. But she had not known about the 20. She had not known that the men she thought might still be unaccounted for in the canyon had been found. All 381. Copy that, she said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady. Tell Commander Walker copy. Yes, ma'am. A pause. He also said to tell you, and I'm quoting exactly here because he made me write it down, he said, tell her whatever happens next tonight mattered. Don't let anyone make her forget that. She did not respond for a moment. Then she said, tell him I heard him. She resumed walking. The weight in her chest did not go away, but it reorganized itself around something new, something that made it easier to carry. 381, all of them. The vehicle at the southern approach was a military transport, engine running, 2 soldiers inside who looked at her when she opened the rear door with expressions she categorized quickly and filed away. Not hostility, not admiration, something more complicated. The look of people who know something happened and are not sure yet what they are supposed to think about it. She got in, she did not make conversation. The drive to the forward operating base took 47 minutes. She spent the first 20 of them doing what her body demanded, sitting still, generating heat, letting the vehicle's warmth work on the frostbitten fingers that had been sending her increasingly urgent signals for the last hour. She spent the next 15 minutes doing an inventory of her equipment, not because it needed to be done urgently, but because it gave her hands something to do and her mind a specific bounded task to focus on. She spent the last 12 minutes thinking about Colonel Stern, not the Stern of the radio, the operational voice, the command authority, but the man she had worked under for 2 years. The man who had, in her estimation, processed her transfer to observer duty as something that had been handed to him rather than something he had chosen, who had never, in 2 years, treated her as less than a professional, who had also never in 2 years treated her refusal to follow that earlier order as anything other than what the official record said it was, a breach of discipline. She had always wondered, privately and without anyone to ask, whether Stern believed that, whether he had read the file and the report and the review board's findings and arrived at the conclusion that the official record had produced, or whether he had his own view that existed separately from the official one. Tonight might answer that question, or it might not. The military had a specific talent for not answering the questions that mattered most in any direct way, for routing those answers through so many layers of institutional process that by the time they arrived, they had become something else entirely. The vehicle stopped. She got out. The forward operating base was controlled chaos, the specific texture of a command element that has been managing a catastrophe and is now managing the aftermath, which is a different kind of work, but no less intense. Personnel moved with purpose. Radios crackled. Somewhere to her left, she could hear the medical team that had received the helicopter working in the way medical teams work after a mass casualty event, fast, concentrated, Voices carrying the specific shorthand of people who communicate in fragments because full sentences take too long. She stood outside the main building for a moment, let the cold air do what it did. Then she went inside. Stern was waiting. He was standing at a table covered in maps and communication equipment, in the physical detritus of a night that had not gone according to any plan, and he was looking at her in a way that she could not immediately read. He was 53 years old, career military, the kind of career that shows in the specific architecture of a person's posture, a straightness that is not stiff but structural, the way a building is straight. He had gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that deepened when he was processing something difficult. Right now they were very deep. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand, sir." A pause. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not quite amusement, not quite frustration. Something between the two. "That's exactly the kind of thing that makes your file so complicated to read," he said. She did not respond to that. He walked around the table and stood in front of her. Not close, not the aggressive positioning of a superior who wants to use physical space to communicate authority. A reasonable distance, a conversational distance. "You were given a direct order," he said. "A clear order. Do not engage." "Yes, sir," and you engaged. "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. Why not an accusation, a genuine question? The kind that expects a real answer rather than a procedural one. "Because they were going to die," she said. "You didn't know that with certainty." "I knew it well enough," she said. "I have been in observer position for 3 years, Colonel. I have watched a significant number of tactical situations develop from exactly the kind of vantage point I was in tonight. I know what it looks like when a unit runs out of options. And what I saw tonight was not a unit that needed 40 minutes. It was a unit that had 8, maybe 10. If you were wrong, I wasn't. But if you were," she held his gaze, "then I would be standing here having disobeyed an order and nothing would have been saved, and the consequences of that would be the appropriate consequences for that outcome." She paused. "But I wasn't wrong, sir." Stern was quiet. He turned and walked back to the table and put his hands flat on the maps and looked at them without seeing them. She had the impression he was organizing something internally, the way people look when the outside of their face goes still because the inside is moving fast. "The review board is going to convene," he said to the maps. "You understand that? What you did tonight will be evaluated against military protocol, and the fact that the outcome was positive does not automatically resolve the question of whether the actions was authorized." "I understand, sir. You could face serious consequences." "I know." He looked up. "Does that change anything about what you'd do if you were back on that ridge right now?" The question surprised her. Not the content of it, she had been asking herself a version of it since she fired the first shot, but the fact that he asked it, the directness of it, the implication that her answer mattered. She thought about it honestly. Not for long. The honest answer did not require a long time. "No," she said. Something shifted in Stern's expression. Not disapproval. Something more complex than disapproval. "Get some sleep," he said. "Medical first, those fingers need to be properly assessed. Then sleep. We'll begin the formal process in the morning." "Yes, sir." She turned to leave. "Hayes," she stopped. "The shot on the enemy commander," Stern said. 4.2 kilometers. Moving target. Night condition storm wind." She waited. "I've been in this business for 31 years, he said slowly, like a man reading something that he is simultaneously translating. "I have worked with snipers at every level of capability this military produces." He paused. "I have never seen anything like that shot in my life." She did not know what to say to that. She said nothing. "Get some sleep," Stern said again, and turned back to his maps. She slept 4 hours, not because 4 hours was enough. It was not enough by any reasonable measure. But her body took what was available and used it with the efficiency of a system that has learned through years of fieldwork that sleep is not always given in sufficient quantities and must therefore be maximized in whatever quantities it comes. She woke at 340 to the sound of activity in the adjacent corridor. Not emergency activity, the rhythmic, purposeful activity of a base running its night operations. She lay in the cot for exactly 2 minutes, staring at the ceiling, doing the inventory that combat veterans learn to do on waking body check, location check, situation check, and then she got up. Her fingers had been treated while she slept, or rather in the 40 minutes before she slept, during which the medical team had worked on her left hand with the focused attention of people who understand that frostbite has a narrow treatment window. 2 fingers. No permanent damage anticipated. She would feel them at cold temperatures for years, probably. They would remind her. She dressed and walked to the main communications room. She was not surprised to find it occupied. Forward operating bases do not sleep cleanly. There are always people at screens and radios, always people whose job requires the night hours, always the residual activity of a command element that has been running at high intensity and is not quite ready to fully stand down. What surprised her was who she found there. Ethan Walker was sitting at one of the communication stations, not using it. The station was dark. He was sitting in front of it the way a person sits in a chair when they need a place to be, and every available bed is occupied by someone who needs it more than they do. He looked like he had not slept. He looked like the idea of sleep had not yet become a viable option for the part of his mind that was still running through the night's events, still checking and rechecking the way commanding officers check and recheck after actions involving mass casualties, even when the action resolves better than it had any right to. He looked up when she entered. They looked at each other across the room. Neither of them spoke for a moment. There was something appropriate about the silence and acknowledgement, maybe, of the fact that the things that had passed between them over the radio in the last several hours had been more significant than the things most people say to each other face to face, and that moving directly from those things to ordinary words required a transition that the silence was providing. Walker stood. He was taller than she had somehow imagined, though she had not specifically imagined him. It was simply that radio voices do not carry height, and she had formed a mental impression based on other qualities, and the physical reality of him was slightly different from the impression. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He said, "Hayes." "Commander Walker." Another pause. Then Walker said something she had not expected. "I owe you an apology." She blinked. "Sir?" "When you came on the radio," he said the first time, "when you told me to move my men, I asked who you were before I acted." He shook his head slightly. "I should have moved immediately. I wasted time." "You exercised appropriate skepticism about an unidentified contact during an active engagement," she said. "That's correct procedure. My men were dying," he said. "And you gave me a clear instruction, and I stopped to ask questions instead of trusting it." He looked at her steadily. A better commander would have moved first and asked later. She held his gaze. "A better situation would have included me identifying myself at the outset." "Why didn't you?" She considered. "'Cause," she said slowly, "I was not sure you would move if you knew who I was." "What I was?" "An observer on restricted duty with a conduct flag in her file." She paused. "Anonymous instructions from an unknown asset who has already demonstrated capability that's easier to follow than instructions from someone whose credibility you might question." Walker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wouldn't have questioned your credibility." "You didn't know that." "I didn't know that." "And now?" She thought about what Corporal Singh had relayed on the ridge, about the message Walker had sent not through command channels, not through the operational structure that he had every right and reason to use, but through a corporal who had been asked to write it down. Tonight mattered. Don't let anyone make her forget that. "Now I think I might have been wrong about that specific calculation," she said. Something happened in Walker's face, not a smile exactly. Something smaller but not less significant. 381, he said. "Singh told me," she said. "All of them," he said. "Every single one. Including the 7 we were going to leave in the canyon rescue teams went back in after you cleared the ridge. Recovered all 7, he paused. 2 of them were alive." She had not known that. She had thought the 7 were confirmed dead. 2 of them had been alive in that canyon. And because Walker had sent teams back in, because he had refused to accept the count he had been given at the passage, those 2 men were now in the medical wing of this base instead of on that canyon floor. "Walker," she said. "You thought they were dead," he said. "So did I. But I wasn't ready to be done until I was certain." He looked at her. "You taught me something tonight." She did not ask what. She thought she understood. "You do not leave until you are certain. You run the extra calculation. You check the count one more time. You go back into the canyon one more time, even when the math says it's finished, because the math is not always right, and human beings are not reducible to math, and the price of being wrong about a number is a price that some things cannot bear." "I need to ask you something," Walker said. "Go ahead." "The trap," he said. "The way it was built. Whoever constructed that canyon operation knew our protocols. They knew our mission parameters. They knew our response patterns for intelligence recovery operations." He paused. "That level of knowledge doesn't come from external observation." "I know," she said. "You've been in intelligence observation for 3 years," he said. "You've seen things I haven't seen. You understand aspects of how this kind of information moves that I don't." He held her gaze. "Does anything about tonight tell you something about how the intelligence on our mission might have been compromised?" This was the question she had been sitting with since the moment she had watched the trap close in the canyon, and understood that it was not improvised. She had been sitting with it on the ridge, in the vehicle, in the 4 hours of sleep that had not quite cleaned it out of her active processing. There are things I've seen, she said carefully. In my 3 years of observation, things that individually I filed as anomalies, things that, when I put them together in the context of tonight, she stopped. Hayes, I need documentation, she said. I need to go through my observation records. What I have is impressions and patterns, and impressions and patterns are not evidence. What I can tell you tonight is that I don't think the intelligence failure was low level. She paused. It was not a foot soldier talking to the wrong persons in the wrong bar. The structural knowledge they had, the way they accounted for our decision-making under pressure, the fact that the Northwest Passage was under-defended in a way that seemed almost designed to look like a viable exit. The passage was a funnel, Walker said immediately. He had seen it too, even after you cleared it. They expected us to run for it. And they had 30 people waiting at the terminus, she said, which means they knew we'd make it through, Walker said slowly, which means they knew you were out there. The room was very quiet. The implication of that settled over both of them with the particular weight of a thought that has not been spoken before and gains reality in the speaking. Whoever had built this trap had known about her. Not her specifically, perhaps not Captain Olivia Hayes by name, but they had known that the SEAL operation might have an external asset, had built their plan to account for it, had stationed a secondary force at the terminus specifically because they anticipated that an observer with engagement capability might clear the passage. They planned for me, she said. Yes, Walker said, which tells me something very important. What? He looked at her for a moment before answering. It tells me that the person who compromised this mission knows about classified observation protocols. They know that observers exist, where they're positioned, what they're capable of. He paused. That is not information available to most people, with access to training operation schedules. The circle was narrowing. Not yet, but to a category of person, a level of access, a position within the system that would put certain information within reach. Olivia thought about 3 years of observation reports. 3 years of files and coordinates and tactical assessments submitted through channels that she had never questioned. Because questioning channels was not what observers did. Observers collected information and submitted it and trusted that the people who received it were the people who were supposed to receive it. What if they were not? Walker, she said. My observation reports from the last 3 years, all of them were filed through Colonel Stern's command element. I know, Walker said. Stern gave me the order not to engage tonight. I know that too. They looked at each other. Neither of them said what was in the room between them, because saying it required evidence they did not have. Because saying it about a colonel of 31 years of service required something more solid than the logical convergence of a set of coincidences. Because the military was full of coincidences that looked like patterns and patterns that turned out to be coincidences. But also because some thoughts once said cannot be unsaid. And both of them were experienced enough to know that. I need those records, Olivia said finally. My observation reports. The raw files. Getting to those files requires authorization, Walker said. Yes, authorization that, if what we're discussing has any validity, might be controlled by the same person who... Yes, she said again. Walker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have a friend at the Pentagon. Someone outside this command structure entirely. Someone who has access to archived intelligence files through a separate pathway. Is that friend trustworthy? Walker did not hesitate, without question. Then we need to reach them, she said, before the morning review, before the formal process begins and the institutional machinery starts moving. Why before? She looked at him steadily. Because once the review board convenes, the first thing they do is freeze all records related to the incident pending review, which means the observation files I need to look at get frozen, Walker finished, or disappear, she said. Walker stood up from the communication station. The movement had a decisiveness to it, the posture of a man who has finished processing and is now acting. Give me 20 minutes, he said. He left the room. Olivia stood where she was. She thought about Stern, about the 31 years of service, about the 2 years she had worked under him, and the specific way he had treated her not unkindly, never with hostility, but with a careful distance that she had always attributed to the awkwardness of a commander managing a subordinate with a disciplinary flag in her file. What if the distance was something else? What if it was the specific distance that a person maintains from something they are using? Not cruelty, not conspiracy movie villainy. Just the practical detachment of someone who had made a calculation and was managing its consequences, including the human being who was in the framework of that calculation a managed variable. She did not know, she could not know yet. But the weight of the possibility sat in her chest, alongside the image of 381 men running through a northwest passage and the voice of a corporal reading her a message from a commander who had asked him to write it down, and she understood that tonight had not ended when the helicopter lifted off the ridge. It had only changed shape. It was still going. She was still in it. And whatever came next, she was not going to observe it from a distance. Not anymore. She stood in the quiet communications room of a forward operating base in Montana, and she waited for Walker to come back. Outside, the storm had finally broken. She could feel it in the quality of the air, the slight change in pressure that follows a system when it passes. The sky was clearing. Morning was 3 hours away. And somewhere in this building, Colonel Marcus Stern was sleeping or not sleeping with whatever version of this night lived in his head. And somewhere in a file archive that might or might not still exist in the form it had existed in 12 hours ago, there were records that contained the shape of a pattern that two people in a communications room were only beginning to understand. And somewhere outside this base, in houses and apartments across the country, 381 families were still asleep, still unaware, still living the ordinary lives that ordinary nights make possible, still whole. Walker came back in 19 minutes. His face told her something before his words did. "My contact at the Pentagon," he said, and he paused. 1 second. "They had already been trying to reach me," he said. "They've been sitting on something for 6 weeks. Something they didn't know how to use." He looked at her. "They know about the compromised operation. They've known about it in pieces for a month and a half, but they were missing one thing." "What thing?" Walker looked at her steadily. "They were missing the name at the top of it," he said. "The person who made the specific call that routed tonight's mission intelligence. The person who had access to observer positioning data and training operation parameters and SEAL response protocols." She waited. Walker said, "They think they have it now. They think tonight gave it to them." The room was very quiet. "Who?" she said. And Walker told her. And the thing that Olivia Hayes felt in that moment was not the satisfaction of a pattern completing. It was not the relief of a question answered. It was the specific nauseating weight of a truth that changes the shape of everything that came before it. Because the name Walker said was not Colonel Stern. And understanding who it actually was, and what that meant, and why the trap had been built exactly the way it had been built, meant that the night in the canyon had not been the whole story. It had been the opening move, and the real battle was only just beginning. The name was Brigadier General Raymond Hollis. Olivia repeated it in her head twice, not because she hadn't heard it the first time, because hearing it once was not enough to fully absorb what it meant. Raymond Hollis, 58 years old, 34 years of service, the man who had personally signed the authorization paperwork for tonight's training operation 6 weeks ago. The man who sat on the Joint Oversight Committee that reviewed classified observer positioning protocols. The man who had attended the mission planning briefings for this specific SEAL training rotation and had asked questions, specific, detailed, technically informed questions about canyon extraction procedures and communication redundancy in winter storm conditions. The man who had built the exam while sitting in the exam room. "You're certain," Olivia said. "My contact is certain," Walker said. "They've had 6 weeks of financial records, communication intercepts, and movement data. They were waiting on one thing: direct confirmation that the operational knowledge used in tonight's attack could only have come from someone with Hollis's specific access level." He paused. "Tonight provided that confirmation in a way that 6 weeks of surveillance could not. Because of the secondary force at the terminus," she said. "Because of the secondary force at the terminus," he confirmed. "The existence of an observer asset in a classified training operation is not in the operational mission files. It's in a separate intelligence channel with extremely limited distribution. Hollis is on the distribution list. There are 4 other names. My contact has been working through the other 4 for 6 weeks and has eliminated them." He stopped, "which leaves 1. Olivia thought about Hollis. She had met him twice. Brief interactions, the kind that happen at the edges of briefings and debriefs, a handshake, a nod, the quick professional acknowledgement of 2 people who occupy the same institutional world without directly intersecting. She had found him unremarkable, polished, the kind of general officer who had navigated 34 years of institutional politics with enough skill to accumulate rank without ever drawing the kind of attention that rank sometimes draws. Unremarkable, which she understood now was exactly what he had needed to be. Where is he now, she asked. Pentagon. As of last night, his schedule shows him in Washington. Walker's jaw tightened slightly. He would have been watching tonight's operation through the same remote sensor feeds that Stern was monitoring. He would have seen everything. He would have known the trap failed. He knows we made it out, yes. Which means he knows there will be an investigation. Yes, and he has a head start on whatever he plans to do about that. Walker looked at her, which is why my contact needs to move fast. Arrest authority has to come from above Hollis's pay grade, and getting that authority requires presenting evidence to people who are going to resist believing it because Hollis has spent 34 years making himself someone they trust. Olivia understood the specific difficulty of that. The military ran on trust that was built incrementally over careers, and dismantling it required more than evidence. It required a willingness in the people, receiving the evidence something that contradicted everything their experience had told them about the person being accused. That willingness was not automatic. It had to be argued into existence, carefully, with exactly the right sequencing of information. How long does your contact need, she said. They said 48 hours, Walker said. Maybe less if the right people respond the way they're hoping. The review board convenes in 8 hours, Olivia said. Walker nodded slowly. If the review board convenes before the arrest authority clears, she said, Hollis used the institutional process to slow everything down. The investigation into tonight becomes a disciplinary review of my actions, which redirects attention, buries the operational questions in procedure, and gives him time to manage whatever evidence exists. I know, Walker said. He would know that too. I know that as well. They stood in the silence of that understanding. The review board was not just a professional threat to Olivia. In the architecture of what Hollis had built and what was now in motion, the review board was a tool, a delay mechanism, something that a man with 34 years of institutional knowledge could use to slow the machinery closing in on him. And the person who had handed him that tool was Olivia herself. By breaking the order not to engage, she had given him a weapon. She had not known it at the time. She could not have known it. And the alternative following the order, observing, watching 381 men die in a canyon designed by the man who had authorized their operation, was not an alternative she was capable of revisiting as a genuine option. But the fact that she had not known did not change what was true. I need to talk to Stern, she said. Walker looked at her sharply. Hey, Stern is not Hollis, she said. I considered it. Earlier, before you came back with the name. I considered whether Stern was part of it. He's not. How can you be sure? Because of the order, she said simply. The order not to engage. If Stern was part of Hollis's operation, the order would have been the opposite. He would have wanted me active, wanted me to draw enemy fire, reveal my position, become a target that removed me from the board before I could cause the kind of problems I caused tonight. She paused. Stern's order to hold position was genuinely intended to protect the operation. He just didn't know he was protecting an operation that had already been compromised from the inside. Walker was quiet for a moment. That's a fine line of reasoning, he said. It's a correct one, she said. And Stern has 31 years of service with a clean record, and I have spent 2 years watching the specific way he manages this command. He doesn't know about Hollis, she met Walker's eyes, but he can help us with the review board. If we bring him what we have before the board convenes, he can delay the process legitimately through channels he has authority to use long enough for your contact to get the arrest authority cleared. Walker thought about this. She watched him think. He was a methodical thinker, pressure not slow, but deliberate. The kind of commander who processes fast but does not skip steps, because he had learned at some point in his career that skipped steps have a habit of becoming catastrophic later. If we go to Stern with this, and we're wrong about him. Walker started. We're not wrong, she said. I know, she said. She knew what he was going to say. That certainty was not evidence. That two people in a communications room at 4 a.m, running on 4 hours of sleep and the residual adrenaline of the worst night of their professional lives, were not the most reliable architects of a plan that involved accusing a brigadier general of treason. She knew all of that. We don't have another option, she said. Not one that works in 8 hours. Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, if I'm going to walk into Stern's quarters at 4 a.m, and tell him that a senior flag officer used tonight's operation as an assassination attempt on 381 American soldiers, I need you to be certain. I'm certain, she said. Certain enough to put everything on it? She thought about the ridge, about the first shot, about the moment of decision that had cost her everything once before and was, right now, in the process of costing her everything again, and about whether there was a version of herself that would look back on these moments from some safer, less costly distance and identify them as mistakes. She could not find that version. Yes, she said. Walker nodded once. Then let's go wake up a colonel, he said. 423 hours. Stern answered the knock on his quarters door in 30 seconds, which meant he had not been sleeping either, or had been sleeping in the specific shallow way of commanders who never fully disconnect from an active operational situation. He opened the door and looked at Walker and then at Olivia, and whatever he had been expecting, a status update, a medical report, a preliminary discussion of the morning's review board process, it was not what his face told them he saw when he looked at both of them together at his door at 4 in the morning. Come in, he said. They came in. Walker talked for 6 minutes without stopping. He laid it out with the precision of a man who had spent 19 minutes in the communications room, organizing exactly this, sequencing the information in the order that would be most effectively received, leading with the strongest structural evidence, building toward the name at a pace that gave the listener time to adjust to each layer before the next one arrived. Stern listened without interrupting. His face went through several things during those 6 minutes. Olivia watched it happen, the initial skepticism that any reasonable person brings to information of this magnitude, the specific moment when the structural logic of it became too coherent to dismiss, the harder moment when the name arrived, and Stern absorbed the full implication of 34 years of shared institutional history containing something that had been invisible to him. When Walker finished, Stern was quiet for a long time. Not the pause of a man deciding whether to believe something. The pause of a man who already believes it and is managing what that belief costs him. Hollis signed the operational authorization, Stern said finally. It was not a question. He was repeating it back, fitting it into a framework. 6 weeks ago, Walker said. He asked me about observer positioning during the planning phase, Stern said slowly. I told him Hayes was assigned to the canyon system. Routine coordination, I had no reason not to. He stopped. His jaw was tight. He knew she was there. Yes, Olivia said. Stern looked at her, and something passed through his expression, something she had not seen there in 2 years of working under his command. Not quite guilt, something adjacent to it. The look of a person who understands retroactively that they were used. The order not to engage, he said. You could have known, she said. No, he said. But Hollis could have predicted how I'd respond to an active observer during a compromised operation. He knew I'd order you to hold. His voice had developed a quality she had not heard in it before. Not anger exactly, something quieter and colder than anger. He built the order into his plan. He used my protocols against my own people. The room was silent for a moment. Then Stern looked at Walker. Your Pentagon contact, how solid is the evidence package? Solid enough to support an arrest warrant, Walker said. Not solid enough yet to guarantee conviction, without the operational confirmation that tonight's events provide. They need the full picture from tonight, formally documented and submitted through a parallel channel that bypasses Hollis's access points. I have a channel, Stern said immediately, direct to the Inspector General's office outside the normal command pathway. It exists specifically for situations where the normal chain of command is, he paused, choosing the word carefully, compromised. Does Hollis know about that channel? Olivia asked. Possibly, Stern said, but it doesn't go through him. He can't intercept it. He can only react to it after the fact. He stood up. The review board. I can delay it. There are legitimate procedural grounds. The incident report isn't complete. The full casualty and recovery documentation hasn't been submitted. 24 hours minimum, possibly 48, depending on how the procedural objections are processed. That's what we need, Walker said. Stern nodded. He moved to his desk. He was already operational, the man who had answered his door 30 seconds after the knock. The man who processed information fast and moved faster was in motion. I need everything your contact has in written form, he said. Every piece of the evidence package that can be transmitted securely. I'll have it in front of the IG's office by 600. He looked up. That gives us approximately 2 hours before Hollis's day begins on the East Coast. Before he has any reason to believe anything beyond the normal morning after a failed operation. He'll be expecting the review board to convene on schedule, Olivia said. He'll be expecting to control the narrative of tonight, Stern said. The coldness in his voice had crystallized into something precise. He's had 34 years of practice controlling narratives. He's very good at it, a pause. He has never encountered a situation where the observer he tried to silence was the one who documented his entire operation from a ridge 5 kilometers away. Olivia understood what Stern meant, her observation logs. She was an observer. Documenting tactical situations was her function. She had been doing it every night for 3 years. And tonight, she had documented everything, every position, every weapon system, every movement pattern, every communication she had intercepted on open channels, every structural element of the canyon trap that she had cataloged during her hours on that ridge before the operation went active. Her logs were a forensic record of exactly what Hollis had built. Detailed enough, precise enough, time-stamped, and professionally formatted in the way that 3 years of observer duty had made automatic detailed enough to be evidence. The observation logs need to be extracted from the system before the review board process begins, she said. The moment the board convenes, the system gets frozen pending review. If someone with the right access goes into those logs before the freeze, they can alter them, Stern said. He was ahead of her. Selectively remove the elements that document the trap's architecture. Make it look like a sophisticated but opportunistic ambush, rather than something pre-planned with insider knowledge. Can Hollis access those logs directly? Walker asked. Not directly, Stern said. But he has people who can. He looked at Olivia. Your logs, where are they stored? Primary storage is in the observer network, she said. But I have a local copy. Standard protocol observers maintain a local encrypted backup on their personal equipment in case of network failure during field operations. She paused. My equipment is in the medical supply room. They stored it there when they treated my hand. Get it, Stern said now. Before 500, Olivia moved. She was out the door and down the corridor in seconds, moving fast, not running but close to it, the particular urgent walk of someone who has a destination and a time limit and is not interested in anything that exists between the two. The medical supply room was at the far end of the building. She covered the distance in 90 seconds and pushed through the door into the antiseptic quiet of a space that smelled like cold and disinfectant and the specific chemical compound that military medical facilities always smelled like, a smell she had always found oddly comforting, in the way that specific smells attach themselves to experiences and carry the emotional content of those experiences forward. Her equipment was on a shelf, catalog tag exactly where it should be. She grabbed it. She pulled the personal data unit from the pack. Small, heavy, built for field conditions. She powered it on with the specific sequence that bypassed the standard startup and went directly to the encrypted partition where the observation logs were stored. The screen came alive. The logs were there, all of them. Every night of 3 years of observation duty, formatted and time-stamped and detailed in the way that training and habit had made them detailed, a record of tactical situations that she had watched from distances that prevented her from intervening and documented with the precision of someone who knew that documentation was the only form of action available to her. And there at the end of the list, the most recent file, tonight's log. She opened it, skimmed it with the speed of someone reading their own handwriting, not reading every word but tracking the structure, confirming that what she needed was there. It was there, the enemy positions, the timeline of the trap closing, the communication intercepts from open channels, the structural elements of the canyon setup that could only have been implemented with access to information that limited itself to a very small number of people. All of it was there. She closed the file. She initiated the extraction, copying the local backup to a secondary device that she pulled from a separate pocket of her pack, a clean drive, unconnected to any network, that would become the document she handed to Stern. The transfer took 4 minutes. She stood in the medical supply room and watched the progress bar move across the screen of her data unit and thought about Raymond Hollis at the Pentagon, probably sleeping, or maybe not sleeping, maybe sitting in an office watching the aftermath of tonight through the same remote sensor systems that Stern had been using, processing the failure of his plan with whatever emotional register a person uses to process something like that. She wondered what it felt like to build something that careful, that thorough, to spend months studying 381 people and their protocols and their patterns and their instincts, to construct something that should have been inescapable, and then to watch it fail because of one person on a ridge who was not supposed to be there. She wondered if he knew yet that it was her. The transfer completed. She took the secondary drive and went back down the corridor. 451 hours. Stern was on a secure line when she returned. Walker was standing to one side of the room, watching Stern with the focused attention of someone monitoring a critical process they cannot directly influence. Olivia entered and held up the drive, and Stern saw it and nodded without breaking his conversation. She waited. Walker moved to her side. His contact at the penile, meaning Stern, They've been speaking for 12 minutes. The IG's office has a duty officer who has the authority to initiate a preliminary hold on an individual's access credentials pending investigation. It doesn't require a full arrest warrant, it's faster. He paused. If they can get the duty officer to initiate a hold before Hollis's working day begins, he loses access to the systems he would need to manage this from Washington. Can they do it she checked her watch, in 9 minutes? Stern seems to think so. She looked at Stern. He was talking in the clipped, specific way of someone who is managing a complex institutional process in real time, not arguing, not persuading, but navigating. Moving through the procedural landscape of the military justice system with the same kind of precise, calculated movement that she had used on the ridge. Different terrain. 7 minutes passed. Then Stern said, "Confirmed, thank you," and ended the call. He turned to them. "Access hold is initiated," he said. "Hollis's credentials are flagged pending investigation. He won't know until he tries to access a secured system." He paused. "That buys us the time we need." Olivia exhaled. Not dramatically, a quiet, controlled release of something that had been building for the last 40 minutes. "The review board," she said, delayed, Stern said. "I filed the procedural objection 20 minutes ago through the automated system. It'll be processed before 600. The board cannot convene until the objection is resolved, which takes a minimum of 48 hours. He looked at her steadily. 2 days, not absolution, not resolution, not the end of the process that her actions tonight had set in motion, but time, which was what they had needed from the beginning. Just time. "The observation logs," he said. She handed him the drive. He looked at it for a moment, the physical object that contained 3 years of her professional life, and at the end of it, the forensic record of what Hollis had built. "These go to the IG with everything else," he said. "Yes, sir." He put the drive in his pocket. Then he looked at her for a long moment. The specific look of a man who has something to say that exists outside the official framework of what is being said, something personal, something that the institutional language available to them does not quite contain. "Hayes," he said, "when the review board does convene, and it will convene, regardless of how this investigation resolves, because what you did tonight requires a formal review, period, I will be testifying." She waited. "I will be testifying," he said again, and his voice had that quality she had finally decoded. Standing in his quarters at 5 in the morning, the quality she had not been able to name earlier because she had not had enough information to name it. It was not disapproval. It was not the managed authority of a commander handling a subordinate. It was respect. The specific, difficult respect of a person for someone who has done something that they themselves could not have done. "I will be testifying that the order I gave you was based on incomplete information," he said. "That my assessment of the timeline was wrong. And that in my professional judgment, the actions you took tonight were consistent with the highest standard of military service, regardless of the procedural violation they represented." Olivia looked at him. "Sir, that's what I'm going to say," he said, not inviting discussion, not asking for her response, telling her what was true. She nodded once. "Thank you, sir," she said. Walker cleared his throat. Not rudely, the sound of a man giving a moment room to resolve before the next thing began. "There's one more thing," he said. Both of them looked at him. "Hollis is going to know, when the access hold hits his credentials, that something is in motion." Walker said, "He spent 34 years in this institution. He'll understand what an access hold means. He'll know the timeline, how long it takes to initiate, what it implies about how much the IG's office already knows." He paused. "He'll also know that the hold was initiated the morning after his operation failed, which means he'll be able to calculate fairly precisely that someone on the ground last night had enough information to trigger it. He'll look for who went to the IG," Stern said. "He'll look for who had the information to take to the IG," Walker said. "And the list of people on the ground last night who had both the operational knowledge and the access pathway to make this happen is short," Olivia said. "Very short," Walker said. He looked at her. "Hollis has resources that exist outside the institutional framework we just used against him. People who work for him at a distance, who operate in spaces that the IG's hold does not reach." He said it directly without softening it, because she was not the kind of person who needed information softened. "You need to be careful." She absorbed this. 3 years of observer duty had not prepared her for the specific experience of being the observed one, of being the known variable in someone else's calculation. She had spent 2 years learning to be invisible, to sit on ridges and watch without being watched, to operate in that gap between existing and mattering that observer duty required. She was not invisible anymore. She had made herself visible on that ridge with every shot she fired. She had made herself visible in the communications room and in Stern's quarters. She had made herself visible in the most fundamental possible way by being the person who showed up in the story at the moment when showing up was the only option. There was no going back to invisible. She did not want to go back. I understand, she said. Do you have somewhere to go? Walker asked. Outside this installation. Someone who isn't connected to this command structure. She thought her brother David, Portland, Oregon. A man who had spent his life as far from the military as it was possible to get while still sharing a family with someone inside it, a high school history teacher of all things. A person whose understanding of conflict was entirely academic and who had never quite known what to do with the sister who had chosen the path she had chosen, but who would open his door, without question, without requiring explanation. Yes, she said. Good, Walker said. After the formal statements are taken this morning, and they will be taken, the incident documentation process begins at 700 regardless of the board delay. After those statements, you should go. Don't stay on this installation longer than you need to. And you, she said. I have 381 men to account for, he said. Statements, medical follow-up, notification families where required, after-action documentation. He said it with the flat, comprehensive weight of a man describing an enormous amount of work that he is simply going to do because it is his work and there is no version of him that does not do it. I'll be here for a while. She looked at him. At the specific exhaustion in his face, not the weakness kind, the kind that lives below effort and does not interfere with it. Walker, she said. Hayes, when this is over, she started. It's not over yet, he said. She said. All of it, the board, the investigation, whatever comes next. She paused. I want to know how Rodriguez is doing. Something shifted in Walker's face. The same thing that had shifted earlier in the communications room, that movement that was not quite a smile but occupied the same space. I'll make sure you know, he said. She nodded. She picked up her equipment. She walked to the door, and then Walker said, Hayes. She stopped, turned. He was looking at her across the room with the expression of someone who has something to say that falls entirely outside the language available to the situation. Something that the institutional framework and the formal process and the professional distance of rank and command structure does not have words for. He said it anyway. My daughter is 9 years old, he said. Her name is Sophie. She thinks I'm invincible. He paused. She's going to be wrong about that eventually. But not tonight. He held her gaze. Because of you, not tonight. The room was very quiet. Olivia Hayes stood in the doorway of a forward operating base communications room in the Montana mountains at 5 in the morning, with a drive containing 3 years of her professional life in her equipment bag and frost-bitten fingers on her left, hand in the accumulated weight of the longest night of her life on every part of her. And she thought about a 9-year-old girl named Sophie, who did not know that her father had spent the night in a canyon that had been designed to be a grave, who would wake up this morning in the ordinary way of children who do not know what their parents survived, who would call or not call or do whatever 9-year-olds do on the mornings when their world is intact in ways they cannot fully appreciate because they have never known it otherwise. Take care of yourself, Commander, Olivia said. She walked out. The corridor was quiet. The base was in the transitional state between night operations and morning activity, the shift change, the moment when one set of people hands the responsibility for the world to another set, and briefly, for just a moment, nobody is holding it quite as tightly as they were. She walked through it. Her mind was already ahead, already on the drive to the airport and the flight to Portland and her brother's door and the conversation she would have with him that would be almost entirely insufficient for conveying what the last 12 hours had contained, because some things do not translate into the language of people who were not there, and the correct response to that is not to stop trying. She was also thinking about Raymond Hollis, about the access hold hitting his credentials sometime in the next 2 hours, about what he would do when it did, about the 34 years of institutional knowledge he would bring to bear on the problem of a morning that had not gone according to his plan. He was not finished. She knew that. A man who had spent months building what he had built did not simply stop when it failed. He adapted, he redirected. He found the angles that remained available and worked them with the patience and calculation that had built the original plan. He was going to come back at this. The only question was from which direction. And the answer to that question was something she was going to have to find before he did. She pushed through the building's exterior door. Cold hit her, clean and sharp. The specific cold of a Montana morning after a storm is broken, when the air has been scrubbed by hours of weather, and what remains is something close to pure. She stood outside for a moment, breathed. The sky to the east was doing what skies do before dawn, developing depth, the darkness acquiring texture, the distinction between dark and darker that precedes color, that slow, daily announcement that the night is concluding on schedule, regardless of what happened in it. She looked at it, and she thought about something she had not permitted herself to think about during any of the last 12 hours, because thinking about it during the mission would have been a distraction she could not afford. 3 years ago, on a different mountain, she had refused an order. She had refused because she had looked through her scope and seen something that the order had not accounted for, and she had made a decision that had cost her everything she had built up to that point. She had been told, implicitly and explicitly, by the process that followed the review, the transfer, the 3 years of observer duty, that the decision had been wrong, that the correct thing was the order, and the order was the correct thing, and the hierarchy of right and wrong in the military began and ended with the chain of command. She had carried that for 3 years, not accepted it. She had never fully accepted it, but carried it the way you carry a verdict you disagree with when the institutional machinery that produced the verdict is large enough that disagreement doesn't change anything. Tonight had not vindicated her. She did not think of it that way. Vindication was too simple a word for what tonight had been. Tonight had simply been another moment, a different mountain, different scope, different order, different decision, and the decision had been the same one she had made 3 years ago, arrived at through the same internal process, and it had produced the same cost. The cost was different in scale, but it was the same in kind. She was still the person who, when the order and the reality came apart, chose reality. She was always going to be that person. And standing outside on a cold Montana morning, watching the sky develop toward dawn, she understood that this was not a liability. It was simply who she was. The door behind her opened. She turned. It was Corporal Singh, the young squad leader who had carried Walker's message to her on the ridge. He looked like he hadn't slept, which was consistent with everyone else in the building, and he was holding 2 cups of something hot with the careful attention of a person transporting something that matters. He held one out to her. "Commander Walker said you drink coffee," Singh said. "I didn't know if that was still true this early." She took the cup. "It's always true this early," she said. Singh looked at her with the expression of a 26-year-old who has been through a night that has rearranged his understanding of several things and has not yet had time to fully process the rearrangement. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead." "When you were on that ridge," he said, "before you fired, you knew what it would cost you, right? You knew the whole time what it would cost." She thought about the honest answer. "Yes," she said. "And you did it anyway." "Yes." Singh was quiet for a moment. He wrapped both hands around his own cup and looked at it. "I don't think I could have done that," he said. "I don't know if I'm built that way." She looked at him, at the young face that had looked at her over Walker's shoulder in the communications room with an expression she had not fully examined until now. "You went back," she said. He blinked. "What, in the canyon?" she said. "Walker sent teams back to look for the 7 men we thought were confirmed dead. You were on one of those teams. You went back into that canyon." Singh was quiet. "2 of those men are alive," she said. "Because you went back." He looked at the horizon for a moment. "That's different," he said. "It's exactly the same," she said. She finished the coffee, handed him back the cup. She looked at the sky one more time. The color was arriving now, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way real things arrive. Gradually, incrementally. In the honest, undramatic way of a world that does not perform its most important transitions for an audience. Dawn was coming. And somewhere between Montana and Washington, a 34-year career was about to discover that the cost of what it had done was arriving with it. She put her equipment on her back. She walked toward the vehicle pool. She had a brother's door to knock on, a drive to start, a set of observation logs on a secondary drive that were going to matter in ways she could not fully predict yet, to a process that was only just beginning. She walked, and the sun came up behind her. The drive to Portland took 11 hours. Olivia did not take a direct flight. Not because the airports were closed, not because the connections were bad, but because Walker's warning was still sitting in the precise, attentive part of her mind that did not dismiss things simply because they were uncomfortable. Hollis had resources outside the institutional framework, people who worked at a distance, and a direct flight from a Montana regional airport the morning after his operation failed was exactly the kind of movement that a man with those resources could track. So she drove. She stopped twice, once for fuel, once for food. She ate in the car without tasting it, kept the radio off because she did not want to hear news that might or might not be about something she was part of. And she kept her personal phone in her equipment bag with the location services disabled because some habits formed do not require active maintenance. She had time to think. 11 hours is a significant amount of time to think when the thing you are thinking about is large enough to fill it. She thought about Raymond Hollis, about the specific architecture of what he had built, not just the tactical elements, the canyon trap and the weapons positions and the layered response plans, but the foundation underneath it. The months of preparation, the patience required to build something that careful without leaving traces that anyone looking in the right places had been able to find for 6 weeks. The specific coldness of a man who could look at 381 photographs because at some level he had reviewed the operational roster, had known who would be in that canyon, had made a list of 381 names and make a decision. She thought about what that decision required of a person, not the tactical decision, the moral one. The internal moment when a human being crosses from whatever they were before to the kind of person who builds a canyon trap for 381 colleagues. She had spent her career studying the gap between orders and conscience, and she understood that gap better than most people. But this was not a gap. This was an excavation. This was someone who had gone so far into one direction that the original person was no longer visible from where they had ended up. She thought about this for a long time. Then she stopped thinking about Hollis and thought about Rodriguez and Torres and Whitfield, and the 2 men recovered from the canyon floor who had been alive when everyone assumed they were dead. And Singh standing outside the building at dawn with 2 cups of coffee and a question that he had thought was about courage, and that was actually about something else, about the kind of person you are when the cost of being that person is higher than you planned for. She thought about her brother's door. She thought about what she would say when she knocked on it. David Hayes was 41 years old and had spent most of his adult life doing one of the most quietly important things that adult lives can be spent, standing in a room full of young people who did not yet understand the world and trying, with patience and creativity, genuine care, to help them understand it a little better. He taught history. He taught it the way good teachers teach things they love, not as a sequence of dates and names, but as a story about human beings making decisions under pressure, which is what all history actually is when you strip away the textbook format. He had never fully understood his sister's choices. She had never fully explained them. She was going to have to try. David opened the door before she knocked. He had always done that, sensed her arrival in the way that siblings who grew up in close proximity develop a kind of sonar for each other, a peripheral awareness that does not require visual confirmation. He looked at her, she looked at him. He said, "Come inside." That was all. No questions at the door. No performance of the concern she could see immediately in his face, the concern that had been there since she called him from the vehicle pool at the base to say she was coming, that had grown during the 11 hours it took her to arrive. He held it together and simply opened the door wider and let her in. She sat at his kitchen table. He made coffee. Real coffee, not military coffee, the kind that a person makes when they have time and care to make it properly. And she watched him do it with the specific attention of someone whose senses are still slightly heightened from experience and are attaching significance to ordinary things. He set the cup in front of her and sat down across the table. "How bad?" he said. She looked at him. "Last night was the worst night of my professional life." "Are you hurt?" "Frostbite, 2 fingers. The doctors say no permanent damage." He looked at her left hand, which she had been keeping wrapped. He did not reach for it. He knew better. What else? She thought about how to answer that, about the volume of what the last 18 hours contained and the inadequacy of language to carry it. "I broke an order," she said. Again, David was quiet for a moment. He knew about the first time. She had told him, eventually, months after it happened, not in detail, but in enough detail that he understood the basic shape of what had occurred and what it had cost her. "Was it the right thing?" he said. 381 men came home, she said. He absorbed that number the way civilians absorb military numbers, slowly, because the scale of it requires translation into human terms before it can be fully processed. 381 people, 381 families, 381 ordinary mornings that were going to happen now that would not have happened otherwise. Then it was the right thing, he said. "The review board doesn't decide based on outcomes," she said. "They decide based on procedure." And the procedure says you were wrong. The procedure says I broke an order. Whether that makes me wrong is she stopped, picked up the coffee, set it down. That's a more complicated question. David looked at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand rather than things he had already understood. It was a quality she had always valued in him, the patience to sit with complexity rather than resolve it prematurely. Tell me what happened, he said, so she told him. Not everything. The classified elements stayed classified not because she did not trust her brother, but because she had spent her career understanding that some walls exist for reasons that survive the individual circumstances of individual nights, and collapsing them selectively creates structural problems that matter later. But she told him enough. She told him about the ridge, about the scope, about watching the canyon below and doing the mathematics and understanding what the mathematics meant. She told him about the first shot, not the technical details, but what it felt like to make the decision, the specific internal moment. She told him about Walker's voice on the radio. She told him about Torres going back for Whitfield. She told him about Rodriguez on the improvised litter. And she told him about Singh at dawn with 2 cups of coffee, asking whether he was built the right way, and what she had said back to him. David listened through all of it without interrupting. He was good at that. 34 years of living with himself had made him good at that, and 20 years of teaching had finished the job. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad would have understood exactly what you did. She felt something move in her chest. Their father had been dead for 6 years. A quiet death, the kind that happens at the end of a long illness, in a hospital room with family present, with enough time for the things that needed to be said. Not a dramatic ending, not a soldier's ending, despite the fact that he had been a soldier for 30 years before he retired to the Oregon house where he had told her, at age 7, the thing about choosing not to help. I know, she said. He would have understood it and he would have been terrified for you, David said. At the same time, I know that too. He looked at her for a moment. What happens now, he says. The review board. The investigation into the person responsible for the operation. A process that is going to take months and involve institutions and procedures that are not designed for speed. She paused. And at the end of it, something will be decided about my career. What do you want the decision to be? She considered the question honestly. I want to go back, she said, not to observer duty. Back. To the work I was built to do. She paused, but I don't know if that's what happens. And if it's not, she thought about Singh's question. About the version of herself that existed regardless of what institutional framework surrounded it. About the person on the ridge who had fired 17 shots at distances that most people would not believe were possible, not because of rank or authorization or career trajectory, but because the ability to help existed and the need was absolute, and those 2 facts, together, produced an obligation that superseded everything else. That person did not require a uniform. Then I find something else to do with what I am, she said. David nodded slowly. Then he said, you should sleep. I know. You've been awake for 31 hours, she said. Go to sleep, he said. The world will still be complicated when you wake up. She almost smiled. She went to sleep. She woke 17 hours later to 3 things simultaneously: the smell of food being cooked in the adjacent room, the sound of her phone, the secondary one, the one with the number she had given Walker vibrating on the nightstand, and the specific quality of light coming through the window that told her it was late afternoon of the following day. She picked up the phone. Walker. Hayes, she said. Good morning, he said. Whichever applies. A pause. The kind that contains news. Hollis was arrested at 600 this morning, Walker said. Washington time. IG's office, 2 federal investigators, and a representative from the Secretary of Defense's office. His credentials had been flagged since the early morning of the day before. So when he arrived at his office and couldn't access his systems, he knew something was in motion. Apparently, he tried to make 3 phone calls in the 45 minutes between arriving and being taken into custody. To who, that's part of the investigation now, Walker said. The 3 numbers are known. What was said on those calls, they're working on it. He paused. The point is he didn't get far enough to use whatever he was reaching for. The access hold Stern initiated cut him off from the things he would have needed. Olivia sat up in the bed, 34 years of service, arrested at his office door. The evidence package, she said. My observation logs. Entered into the formal record this morning, Walker said, along with everything your contact at the Pentagon had compiled, and the operational documentation from the incident itself. The IG's office says it's one of the most complete evidence packages they've received for an investigation at this level. A pause. Your logs are a significant part of it. The structural analysis of the canyon trapped the way you documented it in real time, the timestamps, the specificity of the positional data, it demonstrates a level of pre-planning that couldn't have happened without insider access. It's exactly what they needed to connect the operational construct to the intelligence breach. She thought about 3 years of observation logs. 3 years of nights on ridges and in forward positions, watching things through a scope and writing it down, because writing it down was what she was permitted to do. All of it had mattered, not just last night, all of it. The way that work accumulates meaning in retrospect, acquiring significance that was not visible while it was being done. 3 years of documentation that had seemed like the consolation prize of a diminished career had become, in the space of 48 hours, the evidentiary spine of a treason investigation. The review board, she said, delayed indefinitely pending the Hollis investigation, Walker said. Dern filed the motion this morning. The position of the command element is that a formal review of your actions cannot be conducted fairly while an active investigation into a senior officer's potential interference with the same operational framework is ongoing. He paused, which is legally sound and also happens to be true. And after the investigation is complete, the board will convene, he said. That doesn't go away. What you did was a procedural violation and the board will address it. He stopped. But the context in which they address it will be different. They'll be looking at the actions of an observer who broke an order during an operation that a brigadier general had compromised for the purpose of killing the people the observer saved. He paused again. The board has a process. The process will produce an outcome. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I know what I'll be saying when they ask me. She thought about what he had said in the communications room. My daughter is 9 years old. Her name is Sophie. How are your men? She said. Rodriguez came out of surgery this morning, Walker said, and his voice changed quality, slightly gained something. The surgeon said it was closer than they wanted. But he's stable. He's going to need months of recovery. But he's going to recover. A pause. His mother is flying in from San Antonio. She'll be there when he wakes up. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment. Rodriguez's mother. Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock without fail. She was going to make that call. Whitfield is out of medical, Walker continued. Torres, the kid who went back for him in the passage, Torres hasn't left Whitfield's side since they got to the hospital. The nursing staff tried to tell him visiting hours were over yesterday evening, and he told them very politely that they were welcome to remove him if they wanted to try. A pause sounded like something suppressed. They didn't try. She thought about Torres, 21 years old, a kid from El Paso who had gone back into enemy fire for his teammate because his teammate needed him there. The same calculation she had made on the ridge, executed at ground level, in the passage with bullets coming in from 3 directions. Different uniform, same math. The 2 men recovered from the canyon floor, she said. Both stable, Walker said. One of them woke up this morning. His first question was whether his team made it out. A brief pause. His second question was whether there was any coffee. She almost laughed. She did not remember the last time she had almost laughed. Walker, she said. Hayes, thank you for calling, she said. A pause. I told you I'd let you know about Rodriguez, he said. I keep my word. She believed that. She believed it the way you think about people that you have observed under the conditions that reveal what a person is not the conditions of ordinary life, where people can choose what to show, but the conditions of a canyon at night with the ammunition running out and the exit sealed, where there is nothing left to show except what is actually there. She had seen what was there. It was enough to believe. One more thing, Walker said. Go ahead. The 381, the formal unit, not just the men themselves we've been talking. Since this morning, all of us who were in the canyon, his voice was careful in a way that told her the next thing was important. There's going to be a formal request submitted to the review board, a signed statement from every member of the unit regarding the events of the operation and the role of the observer asset in the outcome. He paused. Every single name, all 381. She did not respond for a moment. Walker, she said. You don't need to, it's already done, he said. Submitted this morning at 800. Every signature collected overnight. Another pause. Singh organized it. Went through the entire unit in 6 hours with a clipboard. Nobravi said no. 26 years old. A man who had stood at dawn asking whether he was built the right way. Who had then apparently spent the next 6 hours answering the question for himself. She put her hand over her eyes, not crying. Something adjacent to crying. The version of that response that exists in people who have learned to compress their emotional range for professional reasons and find, in moments like this, That compression has limits. Tell Singh, she said, when she could say something clearly, that he was wrong this morning. What? He asked me if he was built the right way, she said. He was wrong to doubt it. Tell him pause. I'll tell him, Walker said. They were both quiet for a moment. Then Walker said, Hayes, whatever the board decides, whatever comes next for your career, I need you to know something. Walker, I need you to know, he said, that I have been in this business for 20 years. I have served under commanders I respected and commanders I didn't. I have watched people do extraordinary things in terrible situations. I have seen courage in forms that I did not expect and in people I would not have predicted. He stopped. What you did on that ridge was not just courage. It was judgment. It was skill. And it was something I don't have a military word for, the willingness to spend everything you have, including everything you've spent 3 years trying to rebuild, for people you have never met. He paused. I have a military word for what that produces, the outcome, but I don't have a word for the internal thing that makes a person capable of it. Another pause. You know what you are, Hayes. Don't let any process tell you otherwise. She sat with that for a moment. 17 hours of sleep had not cleaned it out of her, the residue of the night in the canyon. The weight of the decisions, the specific cost of doing what she had done. That residue was going to be there for a while. She knew that. She had enough experience with difficult nights to understand that they don't simply conclude when the morning arrives. They linger. They surface at unexpected moments. They appear in the quiet spaces between other things and require to be looked at before they allow you to move on. But underneath the residue was something else. Something that had been there on the ridge during the 11 minutes of running and the impossible shots and the moments when the ammunition count had told her that she was approaching the end of what she had available, something that the mission had not manufactured, had only revealed, the thing that had been in her all along. I know what I am, she said. Good, Walker said, and meant it. 6 weeks later, Olivia Hayes walked into a review board hearing room at a military installation in Virginia. She wore her uniform, not the field uniform of the operation, not the functional clothing of observer duty, her full dress uniform, with the ribbons and distinctions of a career that had been defined by excellence, interrupted by one act of conscience, and now reconvening to be evaluated again. She sat straight. The board was 5 people. 3 she recognized by name and reputation. 2 she did not know. They sat at a long table, and they had files in front of them, and they had expressions that she recognized, the expression of people who have read a situation thoroughly and are coming into it already knowing most of what they are going to hear. The presiding officer was a major general named Carter. She did not know him personally, but she knew his record: 30 years, 2 combat commands, a reputation for decisions that were fair rather than political, which in the institutional landscape of the military was not a common combination. Carter opened the session. He read the procedural preamble. He established the basis of the review, the order to maintain observer position, the documented engagement, the question of whether the engagement constituted a violation sufficient to warrant disciplinary action. He read all of this in the flat, formal tone of institutional proceedings. Then he put down the preamble. He looked at Olivia. Captain Hayes, he said, I've read your file, all of it, including the previous review. He paused. I've also read the signed statement from the 381 members of the SEAL unit involved in the operation, and the testimony of Colonel Stern, and the formal findings of the Inspector General's investigation into the activities of Brigadier General Hollis, insofar as those findings are relevant to the operational context of this review. He paused. Before we proceed formally, he said, I want to ask you one question. Sir, she said, if you were on that ridge again, he said, with the same information, the same order, and the same situation developing below you, would you make the same decision? The room was quiet. She thought about the canyon, about the enemy commander's laugh, about the mathematics of a unit running out of ammunition in a trap that had been built by a man who was supposed to protect them, about Torres going back for Whitfield, about Rodriguez and his mother on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock, about what her father had said in a backyard in Oregon to a 7-year-old who had not yet understood what it meant. She looked at Major General Carter steadily. Yes, sir, she said. I would. Carter held her gaze for a long moment. Then he wrote something on the paper in front of him. She could not see what he wrote. She did not look away. The board deliberated for 4 hours. She waited in a room down the corridor, alone with a cup of coffee and the particular quality of time that exists in institutional waiting, slow, structured, full of the awareness of what is being decided and the absence of any ability to influence it. Walker had offered to come. She had told him not to. This was hers to sit with. The decision was going to be what it was going to be, and having someone else present for the waiting would not change the decision, would only diffuse the experience of waiting into something that required management. She sat alone. She thought about what she wanted, not the outcome. She had already examined the outcome in every direction during the 11-hour drive to Portland, and the 17 hours of sleep and the 6 weeks of waiting since. She knew what she hoped for, and she knew what she feared, and she had made her peace imperfectly and incompletely, but genuinely, with the range of things that were possible. She thought about what she wanted in the larger sense, life sense. The question that the last 3 years had held in suspension while she watched other people's battles through a scope and wrote them down. She wanted to go back, not to any specific position, not to a rank or a title or a specific institutional location. She wanted to go back to the work, to the thing she was built to do, the thing that existed independent of authorization and rank and career trajectory, the thing that had shown itself on the ridge in a way that no observer's assignment or disciplinary review had been able to suppress. She wanted to be the person on the ridge, not always, not exclusively. But when the moment required it, when the mathematics produced a result that was unacceptable, and the ability to change it existed, and the only question was whether the ability would be used, she wanted to be the person who used it. She had always been that person. The board was deciding whether the military still wanted her to be at inside structure, or whether she would have to find another structure. Either way, she was still that person. The door opened. An aide stepped into the room, young, professional, carrying the message the way aides carry messages that are too significant to transmit through any other format. "Captain Hayes," he said. "The board is ready," she stood. She walked back down the corridor. She went through the door. She stood in front of the table. Carter looked at her. "Captain Hayes," he said, "the board has completed its deliberation." He looked at the paper in front of him. "The board finds that the actions taken by Captain Hayes on the night in question constituted a technical violation of the order issued by Colonel Stern." He paused. "The board further finds that the specific circumstances of that night, including the documented compromise of the operational framework by a senior officer, the inadequacy of the available time for official authorization processes, and the imminent threat to the lives of 381 American military personnel, represent mitigating factors of extraordinary weight." She stood straight. "The board further finds," Carter continued, "that the professional judgment, technical skill, and personal courage demonstrated by Captain Hayes during the operation represent a standard of performance that reflects the highest values of military service." He paused. "The board's recommendation to the commanding authority is as follows. Captain Hayes is to receive a formal notation in her service record, acknowledging the procedural violation." He looked up from the paper. "And the board recommends her immediate reinstatement to active engagement duty, with full restoration of operational clearances." The room was quiet. She did not move for a moment, not from shock. She had allowed herself to hope for this, carefully, without letting the hope become expectation, in the same way that she calculated shots, not assuming the ideal outcome, but preparing for it while accounting for everything else. "It had arrived, Captain Hayes," Carter said. He was looking at her with the expression she had seen in Stern's quarters, and in Walker's face in the communications room, the expression she still did not have a single military word for. "You are dismissed." She straightened to attention. "Sir," she said. She walked out. Walker was in the corridor. She stopped. He was in his dress uniform, which told her he had been here for the deliberation period, that he had come anyway, despite what she had told him, and had waited in the corridor rather than the waiting room, which was exactly the kind of decision she should have expected from him. He looked at her face. He read it. He did not ask. "Rodriguez is out of the hospital," he said. "He called me this morning. He wanted to know if you had a number he could reach you at." She thought about Rodriguez, a 24-year-old kid from San Antonio who had been on an improvised litter made of 2 jackets and a rifle, carried through an enemy passage by 4 wounded men who had refused to leave him. "He can have it," she said. Walker nodded. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced something she did not expect. An envelope, slightly bent at one corner, addressed to her in handwriting that was careful in the way that young people are careful when they want their handwriting to be legible. She looked at the return address. "Private First Class Aaron Torres, El Paso, Texas." She looked at Walker. "He found my address through Singh," Walker said. "Singh found it through channels I probably should not have authorized." A pause that was not quite a smile. "I authorized them anyway." She took the envelope. She looked at it for a moment without opening it. He's 21 years old, Walker said. He wrote a letter instead of sending a message, because he said a letter was the right format for what he wanted to say. She thought about Torres in the passage. Going back for Whitfield, the way he had talked to his teammate while pulling him through enemy fire, not because talking helped tactically, but because his teammate had needed to hear a voice, and Torres had understood that and had provided it. The same instinct. Always the same instinct. She put the envelope in her jacket, against her chest, to be read later alone, in the way that some things are meant to be received. What are you going to do now? Walker said. She thought about it. My brother teaches history, she said. He's been trying for 20 years to explain to teenagers why the decisions that people made in difficult moments are the most important part of history, why the dates and the names matter less than the moments when a person looked at a situation and decided what to do. Walker listened. I think, she said, that for the first time in my life, I might have something useful to contribute to that conversation. Walker was quiet for a moment. You're going to teach? He said. Eventually, she said. First, I'm going to go back to work. She looked at him steadily. The kind of work I was built for. He held her gaze. Then he said, good. One word. Months passed. The Hollis investigation moved through the institutional machinery of the military justice system with the slow, grinding thoroughness that such investigations require. Evidence was examined. Testimony was taken. The 3 phone calls he had made in the 45 minutes before his arrest were traced, and what they led to expanded the investigation in ways that extended its timeline and its scope. He was convicted on 7 counts, including conspiracy, provision of classified information to a foreign entity, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The sentence was delivered in a courtroom that Olivia did not attend. In proceedings, she followed through documents rather than presence, because some endings do not require a witness. Rodriguez went back to San Antonio for his recovery. He called Olivia on the 2nd week of December, Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, which made her laugh in a way she had not laughed in a while. He told her his mother wanted to speak with her. She said she would be honored. His mother called her the next day and cried for the first 4 minutes of the conversation, quietly, the way mothers cry when they are grateful for something that they cannot fully articulate. And then she said, thank you for giving him back to me. And Olivia said he did most of it himself. Torres and Whitfield were deployed together 8 months after the Canyon. Their own request. Submitted together, countersigned by each other, accompanied by a note from Torres that their commanding officer later described as the most straightforwardly logical argument for a joint deployment he had ever received. It was approved. Singh was promoted. Walker's daughter Sophie turned 10 in the spring. He sent Olivia a photograph not of Sophie, which he understood she would not expect, but of a drawing Sophie had made for school. The assignment had been, draw something that matters. Sophie had drawn a mountain. On the mountain was a small figure. Above the figure was a single star. Walker had written on the back of the photograph, in his own handwriting, she doesn't know the details. She just knows someone stayed on the mountain. Olivia kept the photograph. She kept Torres's letter too. She read it sometimes. On the nights when the cost of everything felt heavier than the weight of the good it had produced, the nights that come to everyone who has been in a canyon at its worst and carried it out of there inside them. Torres had written, in the careful handwriting of a 21-year-old who wanted to be understood, I don't know your name. I mean, I know it now, Walker told me. But on the night in the canyon, I didn't know anything about you except that something was out there in the dark on our side. And I want you to know that when I went back for Whitfield, when I made that decision in the passage, it wasn't only because of my training. It was because I could feel that someone was out there doing the same thing, choosing the person in front of them instead of the safer option. I don't know how to explain it better than that. I just felt it, and it made me feel like I wasn't alone. She was not a person who cried easily, but she cried over that letter, once alone the right way. And then she folded it and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope back against her chest and went back to work, because that was who she was. She had always been that person on the mountain, the one who stayed when staying cost everything, who fired when firing was the only honest option, who chose the people below her over the safety of the ridge above, not because it was easy, or because it was recognized, or because it was without consequence, but because the ability to help and the need for help had come together in the same moment, and she had been made, somewhere in the deep permanent architecture of herself, to respond to that with everything she had. That was not a career. It was not a rank or a clearance level, or a position on an organizational chart. It was simply completely irreducibly who Captain Olivia Hayes was. And on a frozen Montana ridge, in the worst hours of a night that should have ended differently, with an empty rifle and frostbitten fingers, and the sound of rotors finally breaking through a clearing storm, she had proven it in a way that no review board, no disciplinary record, and no 34-year career built on betrayal could ever take away. Some people are built to watch. She was built to act. And the world, all 381 breathing, living, going home pieces of it, was better because she knew the difference.